Section 1, Season 1, 198, 91990. The couch that warned us everything. There is a house on Evergreen Terrace that you have known your entire life. You have probably never been there. You have never walked through its front door, never sat at the kitchen table, never watched the television set that glows in the living room on Sunday nights. And yet, in some part of your mind, the one that stores the things you absorbed before you were old enough to choose what to absorb, you know that house. You know the layout of the rooms. You know the color of the walls. You know which chair belongs to whom. You know the sound of the door when it opens. You know the smell of something burned in the kitchen, and you know the particular quality of light that falls through the windows on an ordinary Springfield afternoon, golden and slightly amber, the color of a world that has decided it is content. The Simpsons premiered on the 17th of December, 1989. That was a Sunday. It aired at 8 in the evening on the Fox network, wedged between a world that was changing faster than anyone could comfortably track and an audience that had no idea it was about to meet the family it would carry in its memory for the rest of its life. The episode was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. It was a Christmas special. It was about a father who had no money, a dog he won at a racetrack, and a family that somehow ended up warmer at the end of the night than at the beginning. It was, by the standards of what would follow, a very gentle episode, and that gentleness is important, because the show that premiered in December 1989 was not the show it would eventually become. Season 1 of The Simpsons is a quieter, softer, more grounded thing than most people remember it as. The animation is rougher, the characters are rounder, their proportions slightly different, their voices not yet fully settled into the versions we now consider definitive. The stories are smaller. Homer goes to work. Bart gets in trouble at school. Lisa plays saxophone in her room. Marge worries. The family argues, and then stops arguing, because the argument isn't the point. The point, in Season 1, is always the same. The family is the point. But underneath that warmth, underneath the gentle lighting and the Christmas specials and the episodes about school plays and babysitters, there is something else. Something the show planted in its very first season that nobody talked about at the time, because in 1989, nobody was looking for it. Season 1 contains a dark theory so quietly embedded in its earliest episodes that you can watch the whole thing without ever noticing it. And once you do notice it, it changes the way you see Homer Simpson not just in Season 1 but across every single season that follows. The theory is this: Homer Simpson's body was already failing him from the very first episode. Let us sit with that for a moment. The second episode of The Simpsons, the first regular non-holiday episode to air, is called Bart the Genius. It is primarily about Bart cheating on an intelligence test, getting sent to a school for gifted children, and being miserable about it. It is a good episode, it is funny, it is warm, and buried inside it, almost as a throwaway detail, is the first hint of something the show would spend the next 36 years circling without ever landing on directly. Homer takes a shower in that episode. That sounds unremarkable, and in the context of a cartoon family comedy, it is unremarkable. But the scene is drawn with a particular attention to Homer's body, the weight of it, the shape of it, the way it moves through the ordinary routines of a working-class morning. Homer is not a healthy man. He is overweight in the specific, detailed way the show's animators were clearly trying to convey something about, not just as a visual shorthand for gluttony, but as a portrait of a body under sustained stress. A body that has been fed the wrong things and pushed through the wrong environments for too long. A body that is doing its best and losing ground. In the very next episode, Homer versus Lisa and the Eighth Commandment, Homer has a fantasy sequence in which he imagines being punished for theft. The fantasy is played for laughs, but it involves Homer's heart, and the heart is not incidental. It is mentioned specifically, referenced in a context that draws attention to its vulnerability. This keeps happening. Season 1 returns to Homer's physical vulnerability with a frequency that, when you step back and count the instances, begins to feel less like recurring gags and more like a pattern. Homer strains his back. Homer grips his chest. Homer breathes heavily after the smallest exertions. Homer eats in a way that the show frames as compulsive, not joyful. He is not eating because he loves food, though the show will later develop that into a genuine character trait. In Season 1, Homer eats because eating is the one thing he has control over at the end of a day that has not gone his way. He eats the way a person eats when they are trying to fill something that food cannot fill. And every time his body reacts to this, every time he gasps or grabs his chest or sinks heavily into a chair, the show plays it as comedy. The audience laughs. The family moves on. Nobody calls a doctor. The dark theory that lives inside season 1 is built around a single question. What if Homer Simpson's heart was already damaged in 1989? In season 2, the show will introduce the episode with the explicit title, Homer's Heart, and it will begin dealing directly with the question of cardiac health. But the seeds of it are planted in season 1 with enough density that you cannot look at them as coincidental once you are aware of them. Homer works in a nuclear power plant. He has worked there, by the show's internal timeline, for years before the series begins. He sits at a workstation surrounded by equipment that the show will later establish is leaking radiation at levels so far above any acceptable safety threshold that a government inspection would find 342 violations. He eats donuts every morning. He drinks beer every evening. He has not exercised in any meaningful way at any point the show depicts. He is under constant stress, the specific low-grade chronic stress of a man who does not earn enough money, who is aware that he is not respected, who loves his family so much it physically aches but cannot always find the words to tell them so. That is a profile. A medical profile, if you want to be clinical about it. A man in his late 30s with that combination of environmental exposures, dietary habits, physical inactivity, and chronic psychological stress is not a man whose cardiovascular system is quietly thriving. He is a man whose body is building towards something. Slowly, steadily, brick by brick, the way these things always build. Season 1 never shows you the destination, but it shows you the road. And what makes this theory specifically dark, what elevates it from a simple observation about an unhealthy cartoon character into something that reframes the entire show, is the episode that eventually arrives in season 2 to confirm it. Homer's brush with cardiac events becomes a canonical element of the show's universe. His heart is not fine. The show tells you this, eventually, explicitly, which means that every moment in season 1 where Homer grabbed his chest and the audience laughed was a preview. A quiet, gentle, laugh-tracked preview of the thing that was already happening inside his body while he stumbled through the pilot episode and reached for another donut. The show was telling you from the beginning. You were just too comfortable to hear it. There is another dark thread running through season 1 that is easier to miss because it is not about a body failing. It is about a mind failing. Specifically, Homer's mind and what season 1 chooses to show you about the way Homer experiences his own intelligence. In the episode Moaning Lisa, which is the 6th episode of season 1, the show does something genuinely unusual for a primetime animated comedy in 1989. It slows down. It gets quiet. It follows Lisa Simpson through a period of depression, real depression, the low diffuse kind that does not have a specific cause and cannot be argued away. Lisa is sad, and she does not know exactly why, and nobody around her knows what to do about it. The episode is about Lisa, but Homer is in it too, and what Homer does in this episode is interesting. He plays a video game. He plays a boxing video game against Bart, and he is very bad at it, and Bart defeats him effortlessly, and Homer is frustrated but also delighted in a childlike way that is distinct from his adult behavior in other episodes. He is not performing enjoyment for anyone. He is genuinely experiencing it. He is a man in his late 30s playing a children's video game with the full and unguarded enthusiasm of someone who has found, briefly, something his mind can engage with completely. There is a reading of this scene that is simply sweet. A dad playing games with his son. And then there is the other reading. The one where you notice that Homer's mind, in this episode, is most alive and most present when it is doing something it cannot fail at, because the game is already calibrated to be winnable. When Homer faces the complexity of his actual life, the bills and the job and the family tensions and the questions his daughter is quietly crying about, he retreats. Not deliberately, not even consciously. He retreats because the complexity is too much for his particular brain to hold, and the video game is exactly complicated enough to fill his attention without exceeding it. This is a portrait of a specific kind of cognitive limitation, not stupidity in the cartoon sense, the exaggerated bumbling incompetence the show will deploy more broadly in later seasons. This is something subtler and sadder, A man whose mind works best when the demands on it are precisely matched to what it can handle. A man who is not unintelligent but who has been, somewhere along the way, reduced. Brought down from whatever he might have been to whatever he is, and the reduction has happened so gradually, over so many years, through so many small exposures and small surrenders, that neither Homer nor anyone around him has noticed it happening. Season 1 plants this. It does not explain it. It does not have to. The explanation will take 36 more years to fully assemble. But the first piece is there, in the 6th episode, in the image of a grown man playing a boxing game alone, because it is the one arena where his mind can keep up. The theory about Homer's body failing from the beginning connects to something even larger when you hold it against the show's very first image. Not the first image of the pilot episode, which begins in space and pulls down through clouds into Springfield in a long animated swoop. The first image of what we might call the show's visual grammar, the piece of imagery it returns to week after week, the image that becomes as familiar as the faces of the characters themselves. The couch. Every episode of The Simpsons ends its opening credits with a couch gag. The family rushes through the door and piles onto the living room couch, and the camera holds on them for a moment before the episode begins. The couch gags become more elaborate over time, more experimental, more surreal, more self-aware. Some of them are masterpieces of compressed absurdism, but in Season 1 they are simple. The family runs in, the family sits down, they are home, and the couch, in Season 1, is where Homer falls asleep. Not in the couch gags. In the actual episodes, Homer falls asleep on the couch. Homer slides into unconsciousness during family discussions, during television programs, during conversations with Marge. His exhaustion is played as comedy, but it is also consistent. It is every episode, and it is specifically the exhaustion of a man whose body is burning through its reserves faster than rest can replenish them. The couch is where Homer goes when the day has taken everything he has. And the couch is where, if the theory about his declining health is correct, the day will eventually take more than he can give. Season 1 does not show you this. Season 1 is warm and funny and gentle, and it loves its characters in the uncomplicated way of something that has not yet learned how complicated love can get. But it planted the seed. In every heavy breath, and every grabbed chest, and every man sinking into a couch, because the day required more of him than he had. The show knew what was coming for Homer. It just let him have the couch a little longer before it arrived. Before we move on, drop a comment below with the time and the place you are watching from. Whether it is 3 in the morning with rain on the window, or late afternoon with the light going golden outside your room, it is nice to know where you are. And if this kind of storytelling is what you are looking for, subscribe so you find the next one when it arrives. Section 2 Season 2, 1990-1991. Blinky and the Warning, Nobody Heard. Season 2 of The Simpsons arrives in the fall of 1990, and it arrives with ambition. The animation is more confident. The voices have settled. The characters have begun to discover the versions of themselves they will occupy for the next 3 decades. Homer, a little funnier, a little louder, Marge, a little more expressive, Bart, sharper and more lovably irreverent, Lisa already showing the first signs of the philosophical depth that will define her. The show is finding its rhythm, and the rhythm is good. But Season 2 also contains the moment that, in retrospect, is the clearest early signal of what the show was quietly building underneath its comedy. The Three-Eyed Fish, Blinky. The episode is called 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, and it aired on the 1st of November 1990. It is an episode about politics and ambition and the specific arrogance of a man who believes that enough money can transform any truth into a manageable narrative. It is an episode about Mr. Burns running for governor of Springfield, and it begins with Bart fishing in the river near the nuclear power plant and pulling up a fish with 3 eyes. 3 eyes. Not 2. 3. The third eye is centered above the other 2, small and milky, and the fish carries it the way a body carries a scar, not by choice but because something happened to it that changed the shape of what it was supposed to be. Bart holds this fish up and the image is played as a moment of wonder and comedy and mild grotesquerie. The fish is strange. The fish is funny. The fish is, to a 10-year-old boy who loves anything weird, genuinely exciting. What the fish actually is evidence. Let us think about what Blinky represents in real biological terms, not cartoon terms, real ones. A three-eyed fish is a creature whose genetic expression was disrupted during development. Something interfered with the normal cellular processes that determine how a vertebrate organism grows its sensory organs. That interference was environmental. It was chemical, or radiological, or both. Something in the water in which that fish developed, the water it breathed through its gills, the water that constituted its entire world during the most formative stage of its existence, contained something that was not supposed to be there. The river near the Springfield nuclear power plant contains something that is not supposed to be there. The show tells you this directly. It uses Blinky as a political football in the episode, a piece of evidence that gubernatorial candidate Mary Bailey holds up to demonstrate that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns, in response, does what wealthy men in the show's universe always do. He turns the problem into a performance. He appears on television and eats Blinky, presenting his willingness to consume the mutated fish as proof that it is safe, that the contamination claim is a hoax, that the nuclear power plant is a good neighbor and a responsible corporate citizen. The town watches. The town believes it, or decides to believe it, because believing it is easier. Mary Bailey loses the election. Burns does not win. His campaign collapses for other reasons. But the specific lie he told about Blinky goes unchallenged. Nobody tests the water. Nobody examines the fish. Nobody follows the obvious logical chain from a three-eyed fish in a river downstream from a nuclear facility to the humans who drink from that river, bathe in it, feed it to their children on Thursday evenings. This is the first explicit confirmation of what Season 1 was only suggesting. The water in Springfield is contaminated, and the contamination is visible. It produced a three-eyed fish. It produced something you can hold in your hands and look at and say, something in this environment is not right. And the town looked at it and said, interesting, and moved on. The dark theory that Season 2 builds around Blinky is not actually about the fish. It is about what the fish means for every other living thing in Springfield, and specifically for the Simpson family. Homer and Marge have 3 children. All 3 were conceived and born in Springfield. All 3 spent their entire developmental childhoods drinking Springfield's water, breathing Springfield's air, living within the shadow of the same cracked cooling towers that are leaching whatever is leaching into the river where Blinky was caught. Bart Simpson displays no conventional signs of radiation-induced physical mutation. He is healthy by the show's standards, energetic and physically resilient in the way children often are. But Bart also displays behavioral characteristics that, taken together, suggest a specific kind of neurological difference. His impulse control is essentially non-existent. His risk assessment is catastrophically poor. He acts and then processes, never the reverse. His academic performance is dismal despite clear evidence, in scattered moments across the series, that his mind is capable of more than his grades suggest. These are not the characteristics of a child who is stupid. They are the characteristics of a child whose executive function is compromised, whose frontal lobe development has been interrupted in some way that leaves the action-generating parts of his brain running at full speed while the braking mechanisms lag permanently behind. Environmental neurotoxins, particularly heavy metals and radioactive isotopes, do exactly this. They do not reduce raw intelligence in the way a crayon lodged in the brain does. They disrupt the regulatory systems. They leave a person capable of generating ideas and impulses, but impaired in the ability to evaluate, moderate, and control them. Bart is not a bad kid. The show makes this clear repeatedly, in the moments that get through the comedy and land in genuine emotional territory. Bart loves his family. Bart is loyal and creative and occasionally shows a depth of feeling that the show clearly wants you to take seriously. But Bart cannot stop himself. He cannot sit still in a classroom. He cannot resist a prank even when he knows the consequences will be bad for everyone, including himself. He cannot apply the intelligence the show occasionally grants him in consistent, sustained ways. Bart is a child whose brain is doing its best under conditions that have made its best harder to achieve. And those conditions began the moment he was born into a contaminated environment. Lisa Simpson presents a different picture, and in some ways a more unsettling one. Lisa is brilliant. The show establishes this without ambiguity in Season 2. She is playing saxophone at a level that suggests genuine musical gift. She is reading books that are beyond her grade level. She is making observations about the world around her that the adults in her life consistently fail to match. By any reasonable measure, Lisa Simpson is exceptionally intelligent, and she is miserable. Season 2 does not dwell on Lisa's unhappiness the way the first season's Moaning Lisa episode did. But it is there, running underneath her storylines, a persistent sense that Lisa exists slightly out of phase with the world she has been placed in. Too smart for her classroom. Too sensitive for her family's particular frequency of chaos. Too earnest for a town that consistently rewards performance over substance. Here is the dark version of this. If the contaminated environment in Springfield has disrupted cognitive development in the town's children, the disruption would not be uniform. Biology is not uniform. Genetic expression is not uniform. Two children in the same household, drinking the same water, breathing the same air, can respond to the same environmental stressor in completely different ways. One child's neural development might be impaired in specific executive function areas, producing the BART pattern. Another child's neural development might be disrupted in a different direction entirely, producing abnormal hyperdevelopment in certain cognitive areas at the expense of others. Lisa's extraordinary intelligence is paired with an emotional sensitivity that borders on chronic distress. She feels things too intensely. She processes information too thoroughly. She cannot not notice the things she notices, cannot not care about the things she cares about, cannot modulate the volume of her own inner experience down to a level that lets her move through the world with any ease. This is not simply a character description. This is a profile. The profile of a brain that has developed in a way that optimizes certain functions at the cost of regulatory balance. The radiation theory does not propose that Springfield's contamination is making everyone dumber. It proposes that Springfield's contamination is distorting development, making things wrong in different directions. Homer's IQ of 55, Bart's absent impulse control, Lisa's exquisite, painful, isolating intelligence. These are not random character choices. They are the varied expressions of a single environmental cause working differently through different genetic profiles. The three-eyed fish was the first visible data point. The Simpson children are three more. Season 2 also introduces, in the episode Bart Gets an F, a scene that I want to linger on for a moment because it contains something that does not fully reveal its significance until much later. Bart has failed a test. He is facing the possibility of being held back a year. He has studied, genuinely studied, harder than he has ever studied for anything, and he still cannot retain the material in the way the test requires him to retain it. He sits in his room the night before the decisive exam, and he is not slacking. He is not procrastinating. He is trying with everything he has, and what he has is not enough. There is a moment in that scene where Bart's face does something that the animation captures with real precision. He is not performing frustration. He is not mugging for comedy. He is experiencing the specific despair of a person who is trying their hardest and discovering that their hardest might not be sufficient. That the gap between where they are and where they need to be is not a gap that effort alone can close. This is a very specific feeling, and the show gives it to Bart with unusual care. Under the contamination theory, that scene takes on an additional dimension. Bart is not failing because he is lazy or because he does not care. He is failing because the tools his brain needs for the kind of sustained, sequential information retention that standardized testing measures are the exact tools that have been most compromised by his developmental environment. He is trying to build a wall with bricks that crumble and wondering why the wall will not hold. The show frames this as a story about effort and perseverance. Bart studies harder and passes by 1 point, and the emotional payoff is lovely. But the study session itself, the genuine anguish of a child who cannot make his mind do the thing he is asking it to do, is the real content. And that content, seen through the lens the show is building toward without ever fully acknowledging, is the content of a child who was given a compromised set of cognitive tools before he was old enough to understand what was happening to him. There is one more element of Season 2's dark architecture that deserves attention before we move on. The episode Dead Pudding Society involves Homer and Ned Flanders making a bet about their son's performance in a miniature golf tournament. It is a silly episode, deliberately so, and it is warm in the way the early show often is. But it contains a scene between Homer and Ned that reveals something about the social dynamics of Evergreen Terrace, and by extension about Springfield, that the show's darker theories all depend on. Homer resents Ned. This is established clearly in the episode, but the specific texture of the resentment is worth examining. Homer does not resent Ned because Ned has wronged him. Ned is almost pointedly incapable of wronging anyone. Homer resents Ned because Ned's existence is a constant reminder of what Homer is not, and, the show implies without stating it directly, a reminder of what Homer might once have been capable of becoming. Ned's house is tidy. Ned's children are well-behaved. Ned manages his finances without the constant crisis mode desperation that characterizes Homer's relationship with money. Ned is physically healthy. Ned is calm. And Homer, who works in a facility whose safety record includes 342 documented violations, who drinks water from a river downstream from that facility, who has been metabolizing whatever the plant is putting into the environment for his entire adult life, is none of those things. The resentment of a man who intuits, somewhere below conscious articulation, that the gap between himself and his neighbor is not entirely the product of his own choices. Season 2 plants that intuition. It does not name it. It gives it to Homer as a texture of feeling rather than a thought. But it is there, in every scene where Homer looks at Ned's house and feels something that he translates into irritation, because irritation is easier than grief. The three-eyed fish was Season 2's most explicit dark image, but this is its most human one. A man looking across a fence at the life that, in a world without contaminated rivers and cracked cooling towers and 430 years of unchecked industrial negligence, might have been his. Section 3, Season 3, 199. 1000. 992. Homer's Other Family and the Shape of Regret. Season 3 of The Simpsons is widely considered the first fully realized version of the show. The elements that had been developing in Seasons 1 and 2 solidify here into something coherent and confident. The humor is sharper. The emotional beats land with more precision. The characters have become, recognizably and completely, themselves. It is also the season that contains one of the earliest and most quietly devastating instances of the show exploring who Homer Simpson might have been and what he gave up to become who he is. The episode is called Like Father, Like Clown. It is primarily about Krusty the Clown and his estrangement from his rabbi father. But it is framed by Homer and Bart watching television, and in those framing scenes, Homer reveals something small that the episode does not dwell on. He used to dream of doing something else. The show never specifies what. The moment passes. The clown storyline takes over, and the emotional weight of the episode goes to Krusty and his father. But the moment, small as it is, sits in the record. Homer had a version of himself, somewhere in the past, that wanted different things than Homer currently has. Season 3 expands this portrait with the episode Colonel Homer, in which Homer discovers a singer named Lurleen Lumpkin performing in a roadhouse and becomes her manager. The episode is careful. It does not turn into an infidelity storyline in any explicit way. Homer remains faithful to Marge. But the pull that Lurleen exerts on him is real, and the show examines it honestly enough that you can see what it actually is. It is not attraction, exactly, or not only attraction, it is recognition. Lurleen is someone who sees Homer clearly and does not recoil from what she sees. She does not expect him to be different. She does not require him to perform competence. She looks at this stumbling, well-meaning, perpetually overwhelmed man and responds to him as though what he is enough. And Homer, who has spent his entire adult life feeling vaguely inadequate by the measuring sticks of the world around him, every coworker who performs their job with more apparent ease, every neighbor who manages their finances with less apparent chaos, every moment when the gap between who he is and who he is supposed to be becomes briefly visible, Homer responds to that recognition with a warmth that the show renders very carefully. The dark theory that builds from this episode is not about infidelity. It is about the alternative life that Homer cannot quite stop imagining. Season 3's deepest dark thread lives in the episode Homer Defined, and it is a thread about accident. Homer saves the Springfield nuclear power plant from meltdown in this episode. He does it by guessing. Genuinely guessing, pressing a button essentially at random, and having the random button be the correct one. He becomes a hero. He is celebrated. He gives a speech. Children look up to him. And Homer knows. He knows that he did not deserve it. He knows that the heroism was indistinguishable from random chance That the specific mental processes that produced the correct decision were not the processes of a skilled technician who assessed the situation and applied expertise. They were the processes of a frightened man reaching for any available action and getting lucky. The episode plays this for comedy. To Homer being a fraud, the audience laughs, the resolution is warm, but underneath the comedy is something that the show is developing carefully and will continue to develop for decades. Homer is the safety inspector of a nuclear power plant. He is, by the show's own framing, genuinely not equipped for that role. Not in the way that lazy or careless people are unequipped. In the way that a person with cognitive tools that have been systematically degraded by environmental and biological factors is unequipped. Homer is not pretending to be bad at his job. He is genuinely, constitutionally, organizationally bad at his job, and the job is the one that stands between a populated town and a nuclear catastrophe, and he keeps it, for decades. While being demonstrably, provably, canonically inadequate, the conventional reading is that Burns keeps Homer employed because Homer is too stupid to be a liability in the ways that would cause Burns problems. A competent safety inspector might file reports, might refuse orders, might insist on the upgrades and repairs that the facility genuinely needs. Homer does none of these things because Homer cannot reliably process the information that would trigger those responses. But there is a darker reading, one that Season 3 begins building the foundation for. What if Homer knows, at some level below articulate consciousness, exactly what he is and what his role actually is? What if the thing that makes Homer reach for a donut during meltdown warnings is not stupidity but a specific kind of resignation? The resignation of a man who has understood that the job he holds is not actually intended to prevent disasters? That his function at the plant is not safety, but the performance of safety, a body in a chair labeled Safety Inspector that allows the plant to claim it has a safety inspector while the actual safety of the plant is left to chance and crumbling infrastructure? Homer defined, in this reading, is not a comedy about a fraud who gets away with it. It is a tragedy about a man who has already made peace with what he is, who celebrates his accidental heroism while knowing, underneath the celebration, that it was accidental, and who will return to his workstation tomorrow, and the day after that, and sit in the chair and eat the donut and wait for the next crisis that will require either luck or catastrophe. Season 3 shows you this man celebrating. It does not show you him, later that night, alone with what he knows. The episode Burns Verkaufen der Kraftwerk, which is the 11th in Season 3, introduces a moment that deserves more attention than it typically receives. German investors purchase the Springfield nuclear power plant. They are efficient, professional, and thorough. They fire Homer almost immediately. They look at his record, his responsibilities, his documented performance, and they make the entirely rational business decision that a safety inspector with his profile is incompatible with a functional industrial facility. And then they get the estimate for bringing the plant up to code. The show plays this as comedy. The number is staggering. The Germans are shocked. They retreat. They sell the plant back to Burns. And Burns, upon reacquiring it, immediately rehires Homer. The joke is that Burns specifically needs an incompetent safety inspector so the violations can continue. This is the surface reading, and the show offers it without apology. But the detail that sits inside this episode and deserves examination is the reaction of the German investors. These are not negligent people. These are not people who have been living in Springfield their entire lives, drinking the water and breathing the air, and slowly having the edges of their critical thinking worn away by decades of low-level exposure to whatever the plant is putting into the environment. These are outsiders, people whose cognitive faculties are, presumably, intact, people who look at the Springfield nuclear power plant with fresh eyes. And what they see when they look at it with fresh eyes is so horrifying that it nearly bankrupts them to contemplate fixing it. The violations that Homer does not notice, that the town does not notice, that the regulatory bodies that have apparently never conducted a meaningful inspection do not notice, are visible immediately to people who have not spent their lives in the town the plant built. Season 3, through this episode, offers the most explicit confirmation yet of a theory that the show will never state directly. The reason Springfield does not address its own contamination is not that the contamination is subtle or ambiguous or difficult to detect. The reason is that the people best positioned to notice it are the same people who have been most thoroughly exposed to it. The contamination that requires addressing is most visible to the people least capable of addressing it. This is the architecture of the problem, and Season 3 draws it with more clarity than it is usually given credit for. There is a quiet episode in Season 3 called Homer at the Bat. It is primarily a baseball episode, a celebrity-stuffed sports comedy that became famous for its ensemble of professional players doing self-deprecating comedy in animated form. It is a very funny episode. It is not an episode most people would put on a list of dark Season 3 content, but Homer at the Bat contains a scene that the dark theory framework transforms into something unexpectedly melancholy. Homer, in this episode, has made a homemade baseball bat. He has crafted it himself with his own hands from a branch he found. He has spent time on it. He has shaped it carefully. He named it Wonder Bat, and he is genuinely, unguardedly proud of it in the way that a person is proud of a thing they made themselves, not because it is objectively excellent, but because it came from them. When the professional players arrive and replace the amateur team, Wonder Bat becomes irrelevant. Homer no longer needs it. The thing he made does not fit into the world that has replaced the one it was made for. The show gives Homer a quiet moment with the bat. He holds it and looks at it. The moment does not last long. The episode moves on. But in that moment, there is something true about Homer Simpson that the comedy is otherwise not given room to hold. He made something. He was proud of it. And then the world showed him, gently but clearly, that what he made was not enough. Homer has this experience, in various forms, throughout Season 3. He tries, he falls short, he tries again, he falls short differently. The shape of his adult life is the shape of a man who has spent 35 years discovering, repeatedly and in different contexts, that the version of himself he can actually be does not quite match the version he is reaching for. The dark theory does not require you to assign this to contamination or to conspiracy. It is visible without any of that. Season 3 simply shows you a man who built a bat and named it Wonder Bat and then watched it become unnecessary. And the show, to its enormous credit, does not ask you to laugh at it. It just shows it to you and trusts you to know what it is. Section 4, Season 41992, 1993. The last day before everything changed. Season 4 of The Simpsons is often cited as the peak of the show's golden era. It contains some of the most celebrated episodes in the series: Marge versus the Monorail, Camp Krusty, Homer the Heretic, Last Exit to Springfield, A Streetcar Named Marge. It is the season where the show is most completely itself, most confident in its humor, most willing to let its emotional moments land without hedging them with comedy, and most precise in its satire of American life. It is also the last season before everything changes. The dark theory of Season 4 is not about a specific episode, though one episode is the hinge on which the entire theory swings. It is about the shape of the season as a whole, and specifically about what you can see in that shape when you know what is coming at the end of it. Season 4 begins with Homer the Heretic, the episode in which Homer decides to stop attending church and invents his own relationship with God instead. He stays home on Sundays. He makes waffles. He watches television in his underwear. He is, by his own assessment, having the best Sundays of his life, and then God visits him. In a dream sequence that the show plays partly as comedy and partly as something genuinely warm and strange, Homer has a conversation with God. A real conversation, two-way, with a God who is depicted as thoughtful and slightly amused and entirely willing to engage Homer's questions. It is a lovely scene. It is one of the most theologically interesting scenes the show ever produced. And in that scene, God tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. Not yet. 6 months after Homer the Heretic aired, on the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was an April Fool's Day episode called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple. Bart, escalating his April Fool's pranks through the day, takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it in an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the explosion sends him to the hospital. While Homer is recovering, he tries to reach a vending machine across the room. The vending machine tips over. It crushes him. He flatlines. He enters a coma. The episode frames this as recoverable. Homer wakes up at the end. Bart tearfully confesses. Homer springs awake and immediately strangles his son in the show's most reliable physical comedy bit. The family laughs. Everything returns to normal. Except the same episode, in its final moments, informs the audience that Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%. Gone. Permanently. Not recoverable. Not growing back. Homer's brain, already operating under whatever cumulative load of environmental exposure and physical stress 35 years of Springfield life had imposed on it, is now measurably, clinically, quantifiably smaller in function than it was before he went under. And Homer responds to this information by laughing, even though he says he does not understand why he is laughing. The show plays this as the episode's final joke. The audience laughs, the credits roll, and Season 5 begins. The theory that lives at the center of Season 4 is, at its simplest, this. The conversation with God and Homer the heretic was a warning. Not yet. You will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ends, or changes so fundamentally that the distinction between ending and changing becomes a matter of philosophical preference. God told Homer that the answer to the largest question was coming, but that it was not time. And then, 6 months later, time ran out. The coma arrives. The 5% is lost. And the show that resumes in Season 5 is, demonstrably, a different show than the one that Season 4 was. The Homer coma theory, which the show's own writers have acknowledged and deliberately referenced, proposes that Homer did not fully wake up from that coma in April 1993. That the version of Homer who springs awake and strangles Bart is a version generated inside the dreaming mind of a man still lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General. That every episode aired since that date has been a dream. Season 4 is the last season before the dream begins. And knowing that, knowing what comes after, Season 4 reads differently. Homer the Heretic is not just a warm episode about a man's unconventional spiritual practice. It is Homer, fully conscious for the last full season of his waking life, discovering a kind of peace, staying home, making waffles, talking to God. Finding, in the ordinary pleasures of a Sunday without obligation, something close to contentment. Last Exit to Springfield is not just a brilliant labor rights satire. It is Homer, fully awake, discovering that he is capable of more than he usually demands of himself. That when the stakes are right, when his family needs something he can provide through action rather than simply through love, he can be effective. He can fight back, he can win, and the Marge-Homer relationship in Season 4 is drawn with a tenderness that the show will later sometimes achieve, but rarely sustain across a full season. These are two people who love each other in the specific, intimate, slightly exhausted way of people who have been building a life together for a long time and who still, underneath the exhaustion, find each other genuinely delightful. Season 4 is Homer's last fully waking season. It is the show at its best partly because Homer is at his most complete. All the pieces of him are present. The humor and the warmth and the occasional surprising depth and the bottomless love for his family. He is most himself in Season 4 because Season 4 is the last season he is entirely real. God told him it was coming. Homer made waffles instead of going to church, which honestly was the right choice for the time he had left. SECTIN 5. Season 519. 931,994. The Dream That Begins Where Homer Stops. Season 5 begins in September 1993, 5 months after the clip show episode in which Homer entered his coma. The show does not acknowledge the transition. Nothing in Season 5 announces itself as different. Homer wakes up, or appears to wake up, and the series resumes with the same characters and the same house and the same town. The continuity of location and personality creates the impression that the show is simply continuing from where Season 4 left off. But it is not. Pay attention to what Season 5 introduces that did not exist before. Homer goes to college. Homer joins a barbershop quartet called the B-Sharps that becomes internationally famous and then disintegrates. Homer discovers that his mother is still alive, or nearly discovers it, in an episode that plants the Mona Simpson thread it will not fully develop for 2 more seasons. Homer meets a man who claims to be his long-lost brother, though this storyline is actually from Season 2, which is relevant to what comes next. The more important shift is tonal. Season 5 is funnier than Season 4 in specific ways, the specific ways of something that has untethered itself from the ordinary requirements of causal logic. In Season 4, events in one episode had consequences that carried into others. A joke landed because it was grounded in something real about the characters. The absurdism was present but controlled. Season 5's absurdism has a different quality. It is looser, more willing to escalate past the point where escalation serves any realistic narrative purpose. The show is still brilliantly funny. Season 5 contains Homer Goes to College in Cape Fear and Homer's Barbershop Quartet, episodes that rank among the most celebrated in the series. But the comedy has a particular flavor now, the flavor of a dream that has gotten hold of its own rules and is exploring them with increasing freedom. Homer Goes to College is instructive. Homer is sent to college to earn a physics degree as a condition of his continued employment at the plant. He arrives with a college experience derived entirely from the movies, specifically from Animal House, and spends the episode attempting to recreate the hijinks he associates with college, rather than engaging with the actual educational content. This is a very funny premise, and the show executes it brilliantly. But in the dream theory reading, it is also diagnostic. Homer's college experience, inside the dream, is shaped entirely by what Homer's mind already believes college to be. He does not discover that real college is different from the movie version and adjust his expectations. He encounters real college as though it confirms the movie version, which it does not, except that inside Homer's dream, it eventually kind of does, because the dream bends to accommodate Homer's expectations rather than challenging them. This is how dreams work. Dreams are not random. They are constructed from existing material, from memories and desires and fears and fragments of received narrative, organized into scenarios that feel consequential without necessarily being logical. Homer's dream college is not a real college. It is a college assembled from every college movie Homer watched on the couch on Evergreen Terrace during the waking years, stitched together by a dreaming mind that does not have access to actual college experience to correct the construction. Season 5 is full of this. Experiences that should feel alien and disorienting to a working-class man from Springfield, but which bend and accommodate to feel familiar. Fame. In the Barbershop Quartet episode, that comes easily and departs cleanly. Celebrity, in the multiple guest appearances that Season 5 introduces more broadly than the earlier seasons. A world that keeps proving willing to revolve around Homer Simpson in ways that the real world almost never works. In the dream reading, this is not wish fulfillment in a cheap sense. It is a mind constructing the world as it needs it to be, as it can stand it to be, for the purpose of keeping Homer comfortable enough that the dream does not become a nightmare. The episode Rosebud deserves particular attention in the context of Season 5's dark theory. Rosebud is an episode about Mr. Burns and his childhood teddy bear, and it is one of the most emotionally complex things the show produced in its early seasons. Burns, in this episode, is stripped of his usual menace and exposed as something more pathetic and more human. A very old man who misses a toy he had as a child, who has built an empire of power and wealth and cruelty and found somewhere in the architecture of all that acquisition that it has not filled the space where love was supposed to go. The bear's name is Bobo. Burns lost it as a child. He has spent, implicitly, decades looking for it. The episode follows Bobo's journey across decades of American history, from Burns's childhood to Maggie's crib in the present day. And then, in the episode's emotional resolution, Maggie willingly gives the bear to Burns. A baby, whose attachment to the toy has been demonstrated clearly, gives it away to a very old man because the old man needs it more. This moment is played, sincerely, as the show at its most generous. It is Burns at his most sympathetic. It is Maggie at her most extraordinary. And it is the show, if you are watching it through the dark theory framework, producing an image that is quietly devastating. Mr. Burns, the man who owns the plant that is poisoning Springfield, who engineered Homer's family history through decades of self-interested decisions, who has been alive for over a century through artificial means, is ultimately a child who lost a teddy bear and never found his way back from the loss. His entire empire, the whole corrupting weight of his existence on Springfield and its people, is traceable, if you follow the logic far enough, to an unresolved loss from a childhood that ended before most American institutions were founded. Season 5 shows you the baby in the crib and the very old man at the end of everything. And it says, "Here is what is at the center of the thing that broke your town. Here is the wound that became a city. Here is the bear that was lost and the century of damage done in the name of getting it back. Bobo is Rosebud." The show knew exactly what it was doing. Cape Fear, the season's most celebrated episode, is a brilliant comedic thriller about Sideshow Bob's parole and renewed campaign against Bart. It is absolutely and deservedly beloved. And it contains, in its final act, a sequence where the family is in the witness protection program living on a houseboat, and Sideshow Bob walks them through a complete performance of the HMS Pinafore because Bart keeps asking him to continue singing whenever he is about to be killed. This is a perfect joke. It is one of the best jokes the show ever told. But in the dream reading, it is also something else. Bart keeps asking the man who wants to kill him to sing instead. He delays his own death through the power of narrative extension, through the simple mechanism of keeping the story going, because as long as the story is going, the ending cannot arrive. If Homer is dreaming, Bart's survival is not at risk in any real sense. Homer's dreaming mind will not kill its own son. But Homer's dream does not know it is a dream. Inside the dream, the stakes are real. And what the dream produces, in this critical moment, is a solution that is entirely characteristic of how dreams resolve the irresolvable. Keep the story going. Ask for another verse. As long as the music plays, the ending does not come. Season 5's darkest theory is not about any single episode. It is about the shape of the season as a whole, the way it feels like a dream that has figured out its own rules and begun to enjoy them. The way the escalation has become pleasurable rather than alarming. The way Homer survives things in this season that, in any waking physical reality, would end a life. He survives them because the dreaming mind that generates him will not let him die. Because if Homer dies in the dream ends. And ending the dream means waking up. And waking up is the one thing Homer's mind is not yet ready to do. Section 6, Season 6, 199, 41995. Every single reason someone wanted Burns dead. Season 6 of The Simpsons builds towards something. You can feel it from the first episode. There is an accumulation of pressure in Season 6, an escalation of stakes across multiple storylines that the show has not quite sustained in this way before. Individual seasons have contained important episodes, pivotal character moments, emotional peaks. Season 6 does this too. But Season 6 also does something different. It builds. The build-up peaks in the season finale, which is one of the most famous single episodes in the history of American television. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. To understand why this matters, to understand the full dark architecture of what Season 6 constructs and what it means, you need to hold the whole season in your mind at once. Not just the finale, the whole thing. Season 6 begins with Bart of Darkness, in which the Simpsons get a pool. This leads to an episode structure built on two parallel storylines. Bart stuck inside recovering from a broken leg while Lisa becomes popular. The pool itself is notable, a luxury that arrives unexpectedly and then becomes a new social center. But what is more notable, in retrospect, is Bart's experience of enforced observation. Stuck indoors, unable to participate, he develops a particular sensitivity to things happening around him that people are not meant to see. Season 6 is going to need you to understand surveillance and observation. It is going to need you to understand what it means to see something you were not supposed to see, and what you do with that information. The season's dark architecture is built from the accumulation of Burns' damage to the town. By the time Season 6 reaches its finale, Burns has destroyed the Springfield Elementary School's financial situation by stealing an oil well discovered on school grounds. He has bankrupted Moe's Tavern by triggering a financial collapse in Moe's business. He has created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield Retirement Castle, displacing its elderly residents. He has blocked out the sun over the entire town of Springfield with a mechanical disc designed to force residents to buy their electricity from his plant. Each of these actions has a victim, multiple victims. The school budget collapse hurts children and teachers. Moe's bankruptcy hurts Moe and the community center his bar provides. The retirement castle destruction hurts Grandpa Simpson and every other elderly resident. The sun blocking hurts literally every living thing in Springfield. And behind each of these actions, always, is the same man. The same ancient, frail, brilliant, amoral man who has been operating in this town for longer than most of its current residents have been alive, who has watched generations of Springfield citizens grow old and die while he persists through weekly radiation treatments, who has treated the town as his property and its residents as resources and their lives as variables in a longer equation whose conclusion only he can see. Season 6 gives every major character in Springfield a reason to want Burns dead. It does this deliberately, carefully, across multiple episodes, building a roster of grievances that the show takes seriously as emotional content rather than simply plot mechanics. Grandpa lost his home. That is not a comedy beat. For an elderly man whose physical autonomy is already compromised by age, whose social world is already narrowed, whose connection to other people depends on the institution he lives in, losing that home is catastrophic in ways that the show, briefly and unusually, allows to register as catastrophic. Groundskeeper Willie lost his livelihood. Willie, whose entire identity is built around his role at the school, whose dignity is embedded in his labor, who has essentially nothing outside of his position, is left with nothing. Tito Puente lost the music program. The show gives Tito a wonderful resolution to his grievance, a salsa number that is one of the season's great comic set pieces. But before the resolution, there is the grievance itself. A musician who dedicated his career to education had his work erased for no reason other than the indifference of a man to whom other people's vocations are invisible. And Homer. Homer, who has worked for Burns for his entire adult life. Homer, whose mother was driven into exile by Burns when Homer was 6 years old. Homer, who does not know this, who has never been told, whose cognitive limitations make the connection inaccessible even if someone tried to explain it. Homer, who simply knows that the man he works for cannot remember his name. That after years of employment, after showing up every day, after surviving repeated catastrophes and near misses and incidents that would have ended any other man's tenure at any other facility, the man who signs his checks still looks at him and sees nothing memorable. That is the particular humiliation that Season 6 assigns to Homer. Not the physical dangers of his workplace, not the financial stress of his family, but the specific, daily, intimate humiliation of being invisible to the person who has the most power over your life. The episode Lisa's Wedding is a Season 6 episode that operates outside the main dark architecture and yet connects to it in important ways. It is a flash-forward episode, a look at the future, or a possible future, in which Lisa is 23 years old and about to marry an English man named Hugh. The episode is beautifully made. Lisa as an adult is exactly who Season 1 through 6 have been building her toward. She is brilliant, principled, kind in a slightly spiky way, carrying a complicated affection for a family she has partly outgrown but cannot stop loving. And the future she exists in, the 2010 imagined, from 1995, is recognizably the world that would eventually arrive. The technology is right, the cultural texture is right. The show's writers extrapolated forward from their present with impressive accuracy. But the dark detail is this. In Lisa's Wedding, Springfield still exists. It is still there. In the 2010 of the episode's imagination, the nuclear power plant is still running. The town looks essentially the same. The same people are older but still present. The contamination that the show has been building evidence for since Season 2 has not resolved, has not been cleaned up, has not been addressed. The future the show imagines for Lisa is a future where she has escaped Springfield, has left it behind, has built a life somewhere else with someone from somewhere else, and yet Springfield is still there, still running, still glowing, presumably, in the dark. Lisa's Wedding is hopeful in its foreground. The girl who is too smart for her context gets a future worth having. But the background of that hope is a town that has simply continued, unchanged, doing the same damage at the same rate long after the people we care about most have escaped its gravity. Some people escape, most do not. Season 6 was building toward the man at the center of all of it, the one who built the system and maintained it and benefits from it and cannot or will not stop. The finale arrives. The question is asked, and the entire audience leans in. Section 7, Season 7, 1995-1996. The woman Burns erased, and the family she left behind. Season 7 of The Simpsons resolves the shooting mystery and introduces the storyline that changes the emotional context of everything that came before it. We will come to the shooting resolution in a moment. But the episode that matters most in Season 7, the one that the dark theory architecture has been building towards since the first season, is Mother Simpson. It aired on the 19th of November, 1995. It is the 8th episode of Season 7, and it is, by any reasonable measure, one of the greatest episodes of television produced in the 20th century. Here is what it does. It gives Homer his mother back, and it explains why she was gone. Homer's mother, Mona Simpson, was absent from his life from the time he was approximately 6 years old. The show established in its earliest seasons that Homer's mother was dead, that he grew up without her, that the wound this created in him was deep and permanent, and expressed itself across his entire personality in ways the show had been portraying without explaining since the pilot episode. Homer's need for approval, his terror of abandonment, his inability to leave a job that is actively destroying him because the job provides a form of stability that his deprived early life taught him to cling to at any cost. His compulsive affection for his own children, the way he reaches for them in moments of stress, the way his entire emotional architecture is organized around the certainty that his family will not leave the way his mother left. These are not simply character traits. They are the specific psychological profile of a person who experienced early maternal loss and spent a lifetime organizing their internal world around the shape of that absence. Season 7 explains where the absence came from. In 1969, Mona Simpson was an ordinary Springfield housewife. She was married to Abe, who was then not the elderly, slightly defeated man we know from the show, but a younger version of himself, still capable of things. She had a young son named Homer, who was perhaps 6 years old, small and moon-faced, and entirely unaware that his life was about to permanently change. And then something changed in Mona. The show depicts this with its characteristic combination of absurdist comedy and genuine emotional honesty. The world outside Springfield was burning with the particular intensity of 1969. The protests, the counterculture, the sense that the existing order of things was not merely imperfect, but actively wrong and worth fighting. Mona was radicalized by this. She found a cause. The cause was Mr. Burns. Not Burns personally, at first. Burns's biological weapons laboratory, a facility that the show reveals Burns operated in Springfield, a germ warfare research installation that existed in the same town where Mona was raising her son and Homer was going to school and all the ordinary machinery of ordinary life was grinding forward. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade biological agents in Springfield, in the community, down the road from where families were living. Mona joined a group that decided to do something about this. They broke into the lab. They detonated what the show calls an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological material inside. The raid was successful. The germs were neutralized. And then Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen in the chaos. The person she stopped to help was Burns. She looked at him. He looked at her. He saw her face. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not explain to her son why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he slept and disappeared into the night. Abe covered for her by telling Homer she was dead, by producing a gravestone that belonged to Walt Whitman, by constructing a lie that Homer would carry for 27 years as truth. The dark theory that Season 7 builds around Mona Simpson is not simply about her absence from Homer's life, devastating as that absence has been. It is about what her story reveals about Burns. Burns owned a biological weapons laboratory in Springfield, the same town where the nuclear power plant operates, the same town where the three-eyed fish live in the river, the same town where the soil, water, and air have been demonstrably contaminated by decades of industrial negligence. Burns was not merely operating a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He was manufacturing weaponized pathogens in the same community. While families were living there, while children were growing up there, this is not a background detail. This is a statement about the scale of what Burns is and has always been willing to do in pursuit of his interests. The nuclear contamination, as horrifying as the show's evidence for it is, was not Burns's only project in Springfield. It was one of multiple ways he was using the town and its people as resources without their knowledge or consent. Mona understood this and acted on it. Burns responded by destroying her life, not because she posed a meaningful threat to his operations. The biological weapons lab was gone, destroyed in the raid. The specific damage Mona did was limited and done. Burns pursued her for decades not because he needed to, but because she had opposed him and he was not a man who allowed opposition to go unanswered. He destroyed her family out of spite. Out of the specific, cold, centuries-old pride of a man who has never been meaningfully opposed and does not know how to process opposition except as something to be eliminated. Homer grew up without a mother because Burns took her. Homer went to work for Burns as an adult because Abe struck a deal for Homer's job security in exchange for silence about Burns's crimes. Homer has spent his entire adult life in the employ of the man who stole his childhood, and he cannot connect these facts because his cognitive tools have been worn down by the environment that same man created and maintained. The conspiracy is not subtle once you lay it out, but you have to be able to lay it out. Homer cannot. Mother Simpson ends with one of the most quietly devastating images the show ever produced. After Mona has to flee again, after Burns spots her through a cab window and calls the FBI, and Homer watches his mother run for the second time, the episode closes on Homer sitting in his car on a hill outside Springfield. The city lights are below him. The sky is above him. He is alone. He sits there for a long time. The car engine is off. There is no music under the shot. He is just sitting. The scene does not explain what Homer is thinking. It does not need to. The image itself holds the entire weight of what the episode has shown. He has his mother back and she is already gone. He knows who took her and he has to go back to work for that person tomorrow. He is sitting on a hill outside his own life, looking at it from the outside, and he cannot do anything about what he sees. The show cuts to credits without resolution. There is no joke. There is no strangulation. There is no couch. Just Homer, on the hill, in the dark, watching the lights of the town that was supposed to be his home. Season 7, for this episode alone, earns its place in the dark theory architecture. The shooting mystery gets resolved. Mr. Burns survives. The town moves on, but Homer sits on that hill, and the theory built around Mother Simpson sits with him. Section 8, Season 8, 1, 9, 9, 6, 1997. The Alien Who Glowed in the Dark. Season 8 of The Simpsons is a season of revelations. Not revelations in the religious sense, though the show has always had a complicated relationship with faith. Revelations in the sense of things becoming visible that were previously obscured. The season has a particular quality of uncovering, of pulling back the curtain on things that have been operating just outside the frame of the story. The episode that matters most to the dark theory of Season 8 is not the one that gets the most attention. The most celebrated Season 8 episodes are You Only Move Twice, in which Homer works for a secret agent supervillain who turns out to be genuinely kind, and Homer's Enemy, in which Frank Grimes discovers what Homer's life actually is and cannot survive the discovery. Both of these are important. Both will receive attention. But the episode at the center of the dark theory is the Springfield Files. The Springfield Files aired on the 12th of January, 1997. It was a crossover episode with The X-Files. It featured the voices of David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson as Mulder and Scully. It is brilliantly constructed and very funny and has become one of the most beloved episodes of the season. It begins with Homer walking home from Moe's Tavern alone at night. He takes a shortcut through the woods. He sees something. The something is small and slight and luminescent, giving off a soft green glow. It moves toward him. Its eyes are enormous. Its smile is beatific. It says, in a voice that sounds like the voice of a gentle saint, I bring you love. Homer runs. Homer tells the town. The town does not believe him. He passes a lie detector test. Mulder and Scully are called in to investigate. The week ends. Saturday comes around, and the thing in the woods appears again, surrounded this time by half of Springfield who have come to witness it. And then the revelation. The thing in the woods is Mr. Burns. Burns, it is explained, has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so extreme, so saturated with chemicals and radiation, that it gives his entire body what the show describes as a healthy green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly one more week. At the end of each week, his systems begin to fail. He needs another dose. After each treatment, disoriented and dazed, he wanders out of the facility and through the woods, stumbling home in a state of post-procedural euphoria that gives him the quality of a creature from another world. He literally glows in the dark. His skin emits light. His smile in the post-treatment state is the smile of someone who has just been chemically maintained to the edge of life and is experiencing whatever sensation accompanies that maintenance. Springfield saw this glowing figure and assumed it was an alien. Let us hold this revelation carefully, because it contains multiple layers. The surface layer is comedy. The show built a classic misdirect and paid it off with an absurd reveal. Burns as alien, the joke writes itself. It is funny. It is meant to be funny. The second layer is the confirmation of what the radiation theory has been arguing since season 2. Burns is not simply powerful and ancient and amoral. Burns is radioactive in the most literal sense. His weekly medical maintenance involves controlled radiation exposure at levels that produce visible, physical effects. His skin glows. His body has been so fundamentally altered by its relationship with radioactive material, either through his management of the power plant over decades, or through some prior condition, or through both, that it can no longer sustain itself through normal biological processes. Burns requires radiation input the way a normal human requires calories. Remove the weekly treatment and his systems begin cascading toward failure within 7 days. He is not merely managing a health condition through unconventional means. He is dependent on a specific kind of energy that most human bodies would treat as a poison. This is the confirmation. If Burns's body has been so thoroughly altered by radiation that it requires weekly controlled doses to remain functional, what has Burns's body been doing to the environment it operates in? A person whose biology is saturated with radioactive material does not contain that material perfectly. It leaks, in the biological sense, into water, into soil, into the air of the rooms he moves through. Burns has been living in Springfield for a very long time. He has been glowing, presumably for a very long time, and the town has been absorbing whatever his presence radiates, in addition to whatever the plant radiates, for generations. The episode Homer's Enemy is not usually discussed in the context of dark theory. It is usually discussed as a brilliant and unusually bleak exploration of what Homer Simpson represents. Frank Grimes is a new employee at the power plant. He is a man who has worked for everything he has. He has no safety net, no family connections, no luck. Every step of his career has been earned through sustained effort against sustained adversity. He is, by every conventional measure, more deserving of success than Homer. He discovers Homer's life. The life Homer has, the house and the wife and the children and the boat and the beer, the life that someone like Frank Grimes would have to work decades to build under optimal conditions, Homer has through no apparent virtue or effort. Homer does not understand his own work. Homer sleeps at his workstation. Homer has been to space. Homer has met celebrities. Homer's life is, by the standards of a man who has had to earn everything, grotesquely unfair. Frank Grimes cannot process this. His mind, which has been calibrated through decades of experience to expect that effort produces outcomes and that the gap between the deserving and the undeserving should be self-correcting, breaks down in the face of Homer's existence. He dies mimicking Homer. He dies in a moment of madness where he has decided that if Homer can survive anything by doing nothing, then perhaps anyone can, and his own carefully calibrated caution is pointless. He touches live wires. He is electrocuted. He dies at Homer's party while Homer sleeps through the eulogy. The dark theory of Season 8 centers on what Frank Grimes's death means. It means that Homer's survival is not simply luck. It is something more specific, something that the radiation theory and the coma theory approach from different directions but land on the same conclusion. Homer's survival is structural. He survives because the system he exists in has been designed, whether through Burns's deliberate engineering or through the accumulated consequences of his environmental exposure, to preserve him. Homer is too useful to die. His ignorance is too necessary to the plant's continued operation. His specific combination of incompetence and durability makes him irreplaceable in a role that requires someone who will not understand what they are witnessing. Frank Grimes was a man whose mind worked correctly. His mind could see what Homer was and what the plant was and what the situation was. and his mind, in the end, destroyed him. Because a correctly functioning mind in Springfield is a liability, Homer survives because his mind cannot see clearly enough to be broken by what it sees. Season 8 shows you the cost of clarity with unusual honesty. And then it puts Homer to sleep during the eulogy, and the audience laughs. Section 9, Season 919, 971,000, 998. The town that voted to forget its own truth. Season 9 of The Simpsons contains in its second episode the single most controversial moment in the show's history. Not controversial in the way that moral controversies work, not because it was offensive or inappropriate, controversial in the specific way of something that felt like a betrayal. Felt like the show had violated an implicit contract with its audience. Felt like something had been broken that could not be unbroken. The Principal and the Pauper. The 28th of September 1997. The premise. Springfield Elementary holds a celebration of Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. A stranger arrives. He is the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war and presumed dead. He survived. He came home. He discovered that his identity had been stolen. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is revealed to be Armin Tamzarian, a street punk who was drafted into the army, served in Skinner's unit, felt guilty when Skinner was captured, traveled to Springfield to inform Skinner's mother of her son's death, and was assumed by Agnes Skinner to be her son. He took the identity and kept it for 20 years. This is a significant revelation. The show has spent 9 seasons building Skinner as a character. His complicated relationship with his overbearing mother, his Vietnam service, his dynamic with Bart, his earnest, slightly defeated competence as an educator. All of it was built on a stolen identity. Springfield finds out. The town has a meeting. The real Seymour Skinner is present. The truth is fully exposed. And then the town votes. Not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian for identity fraud. Not on whether to restore the real Skinner to his rightful identity. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree. The imposter is declared the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention Armin Tamzarian again under penalty of torture. Fans hated this episode. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, said publicly that he found it deeply wrong-headed. It has been voted among the worst episodes of the series in multiple polls. Here is the dark theory that lives inside this episode. The fans who hated the Principal and the Pauper were responding, correctly, to a violation of something they cared about. The episode erased 20 years of Skinner's established character and replaced it with a retroactive fiction. The emotions they had invested in Skinner's story, his relationship with his mother, his Vietnam experiences, his dynamic with Bart, were revealed to be built on a lie. But here is the thing the fan reaction and most critical analysis of the episode misses. That is how Springfield works. Every reset the show performs, every catastrophic event that is forgotten by the next episode, every character development that is walked back, every permanent change that turns out to be impermanent, every truth that the town absorbs and then discards, this is how Springfield has always operated. The Principal and the Pauper is simply the first time the show shows you the mechanism directly. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the physical expulsion of the inconvenient truth from the community. Before this episode, Springfield's amnesia happened off-screen. Between episodes, in the gap where consequences would logically live, the reset simply occurred. You assumed there was a reason. You assumed the characters had processed whatever had happened and moved on. The Principal and the Pauper removes that assumption. It shows you that the reset is not natural. It is chosen. Springfield votes to forget. Springfield passes laws against remembering. Springfield physically removes the people who insist on inconvenient truths and makes returning to inconvenient truths a punishable offense. This is how the town has always worked. This is the infrastructure that makes every other reset possible. The fans were angry because the show broke their investment in Skinner's character, but the show was trying to tell them something. The investment in Skinner's character was already built on a lie, just like everything else in Springfield is built on a lie, because Springfield is a community organized around the systematic management of its own denial. The dark theory of Season 9 uses the principal and the pauper as a diagnostic tool for understanding every other impossible thing about Springfield. Why does nobody in Springfield notice the three-eyed fish? Because the town voted, collectively and implicitly, not to follow that thread to its conclusion. Because following it would require acknowledging the contamination. Because acknowledging the contamination would require confronting the plant. Because confronting the plant would require challenging Burns. Why does nobody in Springfield age? Because the town maintains, through collective agreement, a version of reality in which time passes differently for Springfield residents than it does for the world outside. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is the town's most fundamental piece of shared fiction, the agreement that underpins everything else. The decision to live in a permanent present where consequences do not accumulate and change does not arrive. Why does Homer not connect the dots between Mona's exile and Burns' identity? Because connecting those dots would require Homer to act on what he knows. And acting would mean disrupting the arrangement that Abe made with Burns, which provides Homer's job security, which provides the family's income, which provides the stability that Homer's entire emotional architecture is organized around protecting. The lie is load-bearing. Remove it and everything collapses. Springfield does not forget because it is stupid. It forgets because it has correctly calculated, through long experience, that certain kinds of remembering are incompatible with survival. Season 9 also contains the episode Bart Carney, which includes a moment that the dark theory reads as almost unbearably precise. Homer and Bart befriend a carnival barker and his son. The family lets them stay in the house. The carnival workers lock Homer and the family out of their own home. The family is displaced by people who came into their trust and exploited it. The episode resolves when Homer discovers a psychological trick to get them out. He creates a situation in which the carnival workers want to leave. The home is recovered, everything returns to normal. But the moment before the resolution, the moment when Homer is locked out of his own house, looking at it from the outside, is the moment the dark theory reads most carefully. This happens to Homer constantly. Not literally, but structurally. He is displaced from his own life. He lives in a house built on foundations he did not lay and does not fully understand. He works in a building whose true purpose he is not equipped to comprehend. He loves a family whose situation he partially created and partially inherited and does not have all the tools to fully protect. Homer is always, in some sense, on the outside of his own life, looking in. Season 9 gives that displacement a literal form in Bart Carney, and then resolves it with a trick that should not work but does. Because in Homer's universe, in the dream where nothing is quite logical, a trick that should not work can work if the dreaming mind needs it to. He gets his house back. He always gets his house back, because the house is the one thing the dream will always return to him. Section 10. Seasons 10 through 1, 519-98-2004. The slow unraveling. There is a moment in the decline of any great thing where the decline is visible, but the greatness is still present enough that you can see both at once, where the original vision and its erosion occupy the same frame. Seasons 10 through 15 of The Simpsons occupy this particular territory. The show is still capable, in this period, of extraordinary individual episodes. Seasons 11 through 15 contain moments that stand with the best the show has ever produced. Alone Again, Natura Diddley, in Season 11, is a devastating episode about Ned Flanders losing his wife, and the show allows it to be devastating without retreating into comedy. Homer the Great in Season 6 set up what will become a recurring pattern of Homer joins something episodes, but it is in this middle period that the pattern becomes a structural default. Homer joins things. Things do not change him. He leaves and returns to the couch. The dark theory of Seasons 10 through 15 is about this very pattern and what it reveals about the nature of Springfield's hold on its people. Homer joins a lot of things in this period. He joins a bowling team. He joins a vigilante group. He joins a secret society. He joins a monastic order. He becomes a missionary. He becomes a food critic. He becomes a boxer. He becomes a mayor. He becomes a carny, a truck driver, an astronaut again in a different context, a farmer. Each of these represents an escape trajectory, an attempt, whether conscious or not, to become something other than what he is. A safety inspector at a crumbling nuclear facility in a contaminated town owned by an immortal billionaire. Each attempt to become something else fails, or succeeds temporarily in ways that do not persist. And Homer returns to the couch and to Marge and to the plant. The dark theory asks, what does this pattern mean? The surface reading is that The Simpsons is an episodic comedy show, and its premise requires Homer to return to his established identity after each episode's adventure. This is true. This is a real structural feature of how the show works. But the dark theory is not satisfied with the structural explanation. The structural explanation tells you what happens. The dark theory wants to know why the structure produces this particular shape of story and what that shape reveals about the character. Homer returns to the couch because he does not have the capacity to sustain the alternative. Each time he becomes something new, he brings all of himself to the new role, with genuine enthusiasm, genuine effort, genuine care. And each time, something fails. Either the role proves incompatible with who he is, or the world around him proves unwilling to sustain the change, or his own cognitive limitations prevent him from maintaining the new identity over time. He is not held back by laziness. He is held back by the gap between who he wants to be and what the accumulated damage of his existence has left him capable of being. This gap is the dark theory of the middle seasons. Season 12 contains the episode Home, in which Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood. It was one of 64 crayons inserted into his nose at age 6. 63 came out, one didn't. The one that stayed lodged in his frontal lobe has been reducing his cognitive function since childhood, measurably, verifiably, physically. There is an object in Homer's brain that should not be there. A foreign body that has been pressing against the tissue responsible for higher-order thinking for Homer's entire life. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ skyrockets. He becomes articulate, thoughtful, sensitive in ways his reduced cognition prevented. He begins to see Springfield clearly for the first time. He understands what his job actually is. He understands what the power plant actually does. He understands the gap between his life and the life he might have had with fully functional cognitive tools. And it makes him miserable. He sees his marriage with new clarity, and the new clarity reveals flaws that his previous self would not have noticed. He sees his friends with new clarity, and the new clarity reveals how limited they are by their own limitations. He sees Springfield with new clarity, and the new clarity reveals what Springfield is. He chooses to have the crayon put back. This is one of the most important moments in the entire series, and the dark theory builds something significant from it. Homer chooses diminishment. He chooses, consciously and deliberately, to restore the cognitive fog that the crayon created. He does this because the fog is better than clarity, because what clarity reveals is a life and a world that are too painful to see clearly. Because the donut is more important than the awareness that the donut is a symptom. This choice is played, in the episode's framing, as somewhat sweet. Homer choosing love over intelligence, choosing his family over his potential, choosing warmth over analytical distance. But the dark reading is less comfortable. Homer has been given, temporarily, the cognitive tools to understand his own situation, to see the architecture of what was done to his family, to trace the line from Mona's exile, to Abe's deal, to his own employment, to Burns's empire, to the contamination, to the crayon, all of it. The full conspiracy laid out in the light of a brain that can finally process it. And he puts the crayon back. He chooses not to know. This is not weakness. The dark theory refuses the framing of weakness. Homer is not a weak character. He is a character who has correctly assessed his options and made a pragmatic decision. Clarity is available to him, but it is not survivable for him. The world he would have to navigate with full cognition is a world whose terms are so painful that the cognitive fog is not a disability. It is an adaptation. The crayon is not what was done to Homer. The crayon is what Homer chose. Because the alternative, the bright, terrible clarity of knowing exactly what was taken from him and by whom and why, is a thing his love for his family will not let him carry. He would rather be happy and stupid in Springfield than brilliant and alone with the truth. The dark theory does not condemn this choice. It simply names it for what it is. Season 13 contains an episode called Tales from the Public Domain, a 3-part anthology episode. The middle segment, Doe Brother, Where Art Thou?, retells the story of Homer and his brother Herb Powell, the character introduced in Season 2 as Homer's secret sibling, the half-brother he never knew existed. The Herb Powell storyline, spread across 2 episodes in different seasons, is one of the show's richest and most underexplored dark threads. Herb Powell is what Homer might have been with different circumstances. Herb grew up poor, worked his way through college, built a car company from nothing, became a self-made millionaire. Herb is intelligent, driven, successful, and when he meets Homer, he is immediately, completely, and enduringly undone by him. Homer, through a combination of bad decisions and misguided enthusiasm, destroys Herb's company. Herb loses everything. The man who achieved through effort what Homer was given through accident loses all of it because of Homer's casual, unthinking incompetence. This is played as tragedy in a way that the show's comedy structure usually prevents. Herb's loss is real. The show takes it seriously, and Herb's anger at Homer is taken seriously too. His refusal to forgive, his clear-eyed assessment of what Homer cost him. The dark theory holds this story as a mirror. Herb is what Homer could have been without the crayon, without the radiation, without Mona's absence and Abe's deal and Burns's deliberate engineering of Homer's diminishment. Herb is the unrealized potential of Homer Simpson given a different early life. And Homer, who cannot see this clearly because his cognitive tools have been reduced below the threshold required to see it, encounters this mirror and breaks it. The show gives Homer and Herb a reconciliation eventually. Herb rebuilds and the rift is healed and the story is given a resolution that the comedy structure requires. But the dark thread underneath the reconciliation is the portrait of what Homer cost himself, in a version of himself he never got to be. Section 11, seasons 16 through 25. 2004, 2014. The Cage Around Ned Flanders. There is a character in The Simpsons who has been punished more thoroughly and more consistently than any other, not for the things he has done wrong, but for the things he has done right. His name is Ned Flanders. And the dark theory of seasons 16 through 25 is not about any single episode or storyline, but about the full accumulated portrait of a man who has been operating inside a psychological cage for his entire adult life, without knowing it is a cage, and what happens when that cage begins to show its bars. Ned Flanders is, by any objective measure, a better person than Homer Simpson. He is kind, he is generous, he helps his neighbors without being asked and without expecting gratitude. He is a devoted father whose children are, by the show's own standards, healthier and better behaved than the Simpson kids. He is physically fit, financially stable, and possessed of a spiritual equanimity that allows him to face the repeated disasters of his life without apparent bitterness. He is also the show's most consistent object of punishment. His wife is killed by a t-shirt cannon. His house is destroyed by a hurricane and rebuilt so badly by the community that it collapses. He loses business. He experiences humiliation. He suffers. He suffers with a regularity and an intensity that, in any narrative framework built around the idea that the world is fair, would be inexplicable. And the show never explains it. It accumulates, season after season, the evidence of Ned's suffering without offering a framework that makes it comprehensible. Ned prays. Ned believes. Ned does what he has been told a good person does. And the universe responds with t-shirt cannons and collapsing houses. The dark theory of Ned Flanders requires a particular episode as its foundation. Hurricane Nettie from Season 8, in which Ned has his breakdown. When the poorly rebuilt house collapses, Ned snaps. He screams at the town. He insults everyone who has ever wronged him, calls them out by name and crime. He says things he has been holding for decades, and then he is institutionalized. At the institution, the show reveals something that changes everything about how Ned reads. Ned was a violent child, uncontrollable, aggressive, wild. His parents, being bohemian free spirits who distrusted conventional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. The psychiatrist used methods that the show, in its comedy framing, describes with vintage behavioral modification language. He beat the anger out of Ned. Not literally, but through sustained, intensive behavioral reprogramming that rewired Ned's response patterns from the ground up. Ned's kindness is not a character trait that emerged from virtue. It is the product of psychological conditioning applied to a feral child by a professional who had been hired to make that child manageable. Everything about Ned's adult behavior is a product of that conditioning. His patience with Homer is not spiritual grace. It is the suppression response of a man whose brain was trained at a developmentally critical age to redirect aggression into compliance. His faith is not organic conviction. It is the external framework that the conditioning requires in order to explain why suffering should be accepted rather than resisted. His forgiveness of Homer after his wife's death is not an achievement of love. It is the automatic output of a system that was built to produce forgiveness regardless of the provocation. The cage is invisible to Ned because Ned has lived inside it his entire adult life. He does not know there is a different version of himself that could exist. The psychiatrist's conditioning was comprehensive enough that the preconditioned Ned, the feral child with unmediated responses to the world, is inaccessible to the adult who stands in the Flanders house and smiles at Homer over the fence. The dark theory of seasons 16 through 25 tracks what happens to Ned's conditioning under sustained pressure. Ned experiences multiple major losses in this period. He remarries. He builds a new life. He finds new meaning. The show gives him these things and then takes them back or complicates them in ways that consistently test the limits of what his conditioned responses can absorb. The test that the dark theory finds most significant is not the death of his wife. It is the episode where Ned begins to fall in love with Edna Krabappel. Edna is, in the show's moral universe, Ned's opposite. She is cynical, where he is sincere. She is sensually direct, where he is sexually repressed. She has no formal faith and makes no effort to pretend otherwise. She is, by Ned's standards and the standards of his conditioning, exactly the wrong person for him, and Ned loves her anyway. This love, in the dark theory, is the first genuine crack in the conditioning. Because the conditioning was built to direct Ned's responses through approved channels, through faith and family and the established categories of what a righteous life looks like, Ned's love for Edna does not fit in any of those channels. It is not what the conditioning planned for. It arrived from outside the framework, and Ned lets himself have it. Edna dies in season 24. The show handles this with real care, paying tribute to the character with genuine emotion. And Ned's grief for Edna, in the dark theory reading, is the grief not only of a man who lost a person he loved, but of a man who had, briefly and unexpectedly, experienced what it felt like to be wanted by someone who chose him freely, rather than someone to whom he had been assigned by the architecture of suburban proximity. The conditioning can produce kindness. It can produce patience. It can produce the specific performance of faith that allows Ned to stand in church every Sunday and receive whatever the week has given him without appearing to crack. What the conditioning cannot produce is love. Love arrived from outside the system and found Ned unprotected. The God theory, which becomes most visible in this middle period of the show's run, is the darkest element of Ned's story. The Simpsons establishes, canonically and explicitly, that God exists. God is a character in the show's universe. God has appeared on screen. God has spoken to Homer. God has expressed opinions and feelings and preferences. God is real within Springfield's reality. God talks to Homer. God does not talk to Ned. This is not ambiguous. The show establishes both facts directly. Homer has had multiple conversations with God across multiple seasons. Ned, who has devoted his life to faith with a completeness that Homer could not achieve in 100 lifetimes, has never received a comparable communication. Homer, who sleeps in church, who drinks to excess, who chose stupidity over clarity, who has spent his adult life in casual violation of essentially every principle Ned has organized his life around, is the one who gets divine attention. Ned, who prays sincerely, who tries genuinely, who has sacrificed his own psychological wholeness in service of a framework he was given as a child and never chose to examine, gets silence. The dark theory does not resolve this. The dark theory holds it, because the resolution, if there is one, is not available within the show's comedy structure. The show cannot answer why God talks to Homer and ignores Ned without either destroying the comedy of God talking to Homer or confronting the tragedy of God ignoring Ned. So, the show does neither. It holds the contrast in permanent suspension. Homer has divine audiences. Ned has empty Sundays. And the fence between their houses is the most significant border in Springfield. The border between the man who gets everything without deserving it and the man who deserves everything and gets t-shirt cannons. Ned is the dark theory's most honest portrait of what the show believes about the world it lives in. The world, Springfield's world, American Springfield, does not reward virtue. It rewards compliance and cheerfulness and the willingness not to notice too much. Ned's virtue is too complete, too earnest, too visibly structural for the world to reward it comfortably. Homer's compliance is the right kind. Uncritical, warm, essentially self-defeating in ways that never escalate into challenge. Ned is trying to be something. Homer is content to be what he is. And Springfield prefers what Homer is every time. Section 12 Seasons, 26 through 3620, 1, 4, 2000, and 25. The loop we built and cannot break. We are in the later seasons now. The Simpsons, in its late period, seasons 26 through 36, is a show that knows itself. It knows what it is, knows how it is perceived, knows the particular mixture of affection and exasperation that long-term viewers bring to it. It has made peace with being a different show than it was in its golden era, or has at least arrived at an accommodation with that fact that allows it to continue producing episodes without apparent distress. The dark theory of the late seasons is different from the dark theories of the earlier ones. The earlier theories were about things the show was building, embedding, developing, seeds planted in Season 2 that grew through Season 7, patterns established in Season 4 that became visible only in Season 12. The accumulation of evidence for larger architectural claims about what Springfield is and what it does to its people. The late season dark theory is about something else. It is about the loop. The Simpsons in its late period is explicitly, consciously, deliberately aware that it has become a loop. It references itself. It parodies its own continuity errors. It produces episodes that are, in part, about what it means to be a show that has been running for 36 years without its characters aging. This self-awareness is sometimes played as postmodern comedy, and it is genuinely funny in that mode. The show making jokes about the jokes the show has been making since 1989 is a legitimate creative choice, and it yields some genuinely inventive material. But the dark theory of the late seasons is not about the self-awareness as a comedy device. It is about what the self-awareness reveals when you take it seriously. The show knows it is a loop. The writers know it is a loop. The audience knows it is a loop. And the loop continues anyway. This is the central dark fact of the late seasons. Not that the show has declined, not that the characters have become less interesting, not that the plots have become more bizarre and less grounded. All of these things are true, and they have been true since somewhere in the middle seasons. The central dark fact is that the show could end, and it does not. The floating timeline, which the show acknowledges and jokes about with increasing frequency in the late seasons, becomes in this period the single most philosophically loaded element of Springfield's reality. Bart has been 10 years old since 1989. He will presumably be 10 years old in 2030, if the show continues. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. The show, in its late seasons, has begun to engage directly with the question of what this means, not just as a production quirk, but as a narrative choice with implications. Episodes have been produced that imagine the characters aging. Flash-forward episodes showing Bart as an adult, Lisa as a professional, Maggie speaking and acting in the world as a full person. These episodes are, without exception, among the most emotionally resonant the show has produced in its late period. And then the show returns to the floating timeline. Every time, the dark theory holds this return as the central image of what the late seasons are about. The show can imagine its characters growing up. It chooses every week not to let them. This is not a production decision anymore, not simply. It has become something more specific. The characters being frozen in time has become, through the accumulation of 36 years, a statement the show is making about itself and about the audience that watches it. The Homer coma theory, which the show explicitly referenced and then denied in season 34, becomes in the late seasons something more than a fan theory. In season 34, a deleted scene was deliberately leaked in which Homer wakes from a long coma and reveals that all the outlandish episodes were a dream. The show then claimed the scene was planted by hackers and was not real. Whether you believe the planting by hackers explanation or not, the fact of the scene's creation matters. Someone made it. Someone wrote it, pitched it, animated it, voiced it, and produced it to a standard that made it plausible as real content. The writers of The Simpsons spent time and resources creating an animated sequence in which Homer wakes from a coma and admits the dream. This is not the behavior of a writing staff that is indifferent to the coma theory. This is the behavior of a writing staff that has been living with the coma theory for long enough that they felt compelled to address it, that they could not simply ignore it any longer. that the theory had grown large enough in the cultural conversation around the show that it required a response. The response was to deny it while demonstrating its appeal, to show the audience what confirmation would look like and then snatch it back, to prove that the theory was internally compelling enough to be animated and voiced and cut together into something that looked like a real episode reveal. This is, if you apply the show's own logic about Springfield's relationship to truth, exactly how Springfield handles things it cannot acknowledge. It shows you the thing and then tells you the thing is not real. The town has always done this. The show has always done this. The late seasons are the era in which the show begins to do this about itself. There is an argument, which the dark theory of the late seasons builds toward, that the loop is not a failure of imagination or courage. That the loop is the point. The Simpsons is the longest-running scripted primetime series in the history of American television. It has outlasted every show it debuted alongside. It has outlasted cultural moments and political eras and technological revolutions and the careers of the celebrities it invited to guest. It has outlasted, in some cases, the celebrities themselves. And it is still there, every Sunday. The same house, the same family, the same couch. The dark theory of the late seasons proposes that the show's survival, past the point of its obvious creative apex, is not an accident or a failure of editorial judgment. It is a function the show serves that has nothing to do with the quality of individual episodes. The Simpsons continues because America needs it to continue. Not in the crude sense of Nielsen ratings or advertising revenue, though both of those are factors. In the deeper sense of what the show provides that has nothing to do with any individual episode's quality. The Simpsons provides continuity. It provides a family that is still there, a house that has not changed. A Sunday night that arrives every week and finds the same people on the same couch in the same living room, older in the outside world but frozen in the fiction, permanently present, permanently available, permanently returning to the same stable image of the American family that the show held up in December 1989 and has been holding up ever since. This is where the dark theory of the late seasons gets its most unsettling edge. America in the period covered by seasons 26 through 36 experienced more rapid and more disorienting change than perhaps any equivalent period in its history. Political upheaval, technological acceleration, the social media transformation of public consciousness, a global pandemic, economic disruption, the specific disorientation of a culture whose reference points were changing faster than most people's ability to process the changes. And through all of it, on Sunday nights, The Simpsons were on the couch. The theory is that the show's late period continued existence is not separate from the cultural moment it inhabits. It is a response to it, a counterpressure. Every week, in the face of a world that cannot seem to stop changing, the show offers the same house, the same family, the same voices, the same Springfield. Homer is still Homer. Marge still loves him. Bart is still 10. Lisa still plays her saxophone. Maggie still has her pacifier. The loop is not what happened to the show. The loop is what the show decided to be at some point in its late history in response to what the audience needed. Not the best version of itself. The most stable version of itself. The version of itself that could be depended on to be there, unchanged, every week, offering the specific comfort of something that has not moved while everything else has. This is a dark theory because it inverts the usual complaint about the late seasons. The usual complaint is that the show is coasting, that it has run out of ideas, that it should have ended a decade ago, that the continued production of mediocre episodes is somehow disrespectful to the legacy of the golden era. The dark theory says, you are describing the function, not the failure. The show is coasting because coasting is what is being asked of it. The audience that tunes in to The Simpsons in season 36 is not primarily tuning in for brilliant satire or innovative comedy or character development. They are tuning in to find something that has not changed. They are pressing play on the loop. Maggie Simpson, in the late seasons, accumulates additional mystery that connects to the dark theory's earliest threads. The show has continued to grant Maggie occasional moments of extraordinary competence, problem-solving, and implied intelligence across the late seasons. The pattern established in the early and middle periods, of Maggie performing actions that no one-year-old should be capable of, and doing them in the specific way of someone who is choosing not to reveal the full extent of what they can do, continues unabated. She is still silent. She has been 1-year-old for 36 years. She has been watching The Dark Theory of Maggie, which has been building since Season 1's image of an infant observing the chaos of the Simpson household with disproportionate comprehension, reaches its fullest form in the late seasons by doing something unexpected. It stops asking what Maggie knows and starts asking what Maggie is waiting for. She has been waiting for 36 years. The show has given her multiple moments where action was possible, where revelation seemed imminent, where the pacifier looked like it might finally drop and the silence might finally end. And every time Maggie retreats back into apparent infancy, in the dream reading, Maggie's silence is Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, expressed in the only language a dreaming mind has available. She cannot grow up in the dream because Homer was not there to see her grow up. But she can be extraordinary. She can be the most capable person in the house while appearing to be the most helpless. She can be a father's prayer in the form of a baby who could save herself if she ever needed to. In the radiation theory reading, Maggie is the endpoint of something. The mutation that reduced Homer's cognition amplified hers. She is the other pole of what environmental contamination does to a biological system, not a corruption of potential, but an amplification of it so extreme that it has nowhere to go within the ordinary categories of human development. She is 1-year-old, and she has been 1-year-old for 36 years, and she is the most intelligent person in Springfield, and she has decided, for reasons the show has never disclosed and may not know, to stay exactly where she is. Behind the pacifier, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the moment she has not yet identified. The late seasons do not resolve Maggie. They deepen the question. And the question, after 36 years and hundreds of episodes, and every dark theory that has been laid over the show like a transparency revealing the infrastructure under the comedy, is the same question it has always been. What is Maggie waiting for? What does she know? What will she do when she finally decides to act? Section 13, The Floating Timeline. The loop that belongs to all of us. Let us come to the end of this. After 36 seasons and every dark thread we have followed, every buried storyline and canonical contradiction and carefully planted detail, every theory that assembles the show's impossible landscape into something that makes a different kind of sense, we arrive at the question that all of them are circling. Why does nobody age? The radiation theory says, mutated biology has altered their cellular processes. The coma theory says, they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man who cannot imagine them growing older because he was not awake to see it happen. The collective denial theory says, Springfield votes every week to maintain the fiction of a permanent present. The Burns immortality theory says, if one person in this universe has found a way to circumvent biological time, the concept of aging is already negotiable, and the negotiation may be more widespread than we have acknowledged. Each of these theories is a different kind of true. Each of them carries a different weight of evidence. And each of them arrives, through its own logic, at the same place. Time stopped in Springfield, and we stopped it. The Simpsons premiered in December 1989. Most of its current audience had not yet been born. Some of the actors who have since joined its voice cast were children when the show began. The show has outlasted the generation of television it was born into. It has outlasted the network strategies that produced it. It has outlasted the cultural moment that defined it, and it is still there. The show's persistence past the point of its obvious creative peak is usually framed as a question of institutional momentum, of a machine that is too large and too profitable to stop, of the specific inertia that attaches to a cultural institution once it has been running long enough to become self-referential. These framings are accurate. They describe real factors, but they do not describe the full picture. The full picture requires you to ask not why the show continues to be made, but why it continues to be watched. And when you ask that question honestly, when you sit with it and refuse the easy answers, you arrive somewhere unexpected. People watch The Simpsons in its late seasons not primarily because each individual episode is delivering something they could not get elsewhere. They watch it because watching it connects them to something, to the first time they watched it, to the person they were when they watched it, To the couch they sat on, the family they sat with, the Sunday night that felt ordinary at the time and in retrospect was something specific, something irreplaceable, something they can find a version of only by pressing play. The floating timeline does not just protect the characters from aging, it protects the audience's relationship with the characters from the damage that time causes to all relationships. Homer can be the Homer you first encountered because he is always the Homer he always was. Bart is always 10. The house is always there. The loop is a technology of memory. The dark theory of the floating timeline is not that it is sad. The dark theory is that it is necessary. Every culture has its technologies of continuity, its ways of maintaining connection to a past that time insists on moving away from. Religion does this. Ritual does this. Stories do this. The specific technology that The Simpsons provides is the frozen family, the permanent present, the Sunday night that is always available whenever you need to return to it. This technology serves a real human need. The need to have something that does not change in a world that changes faster than any individual consciousness can comfortably track. The need for a home you can always find, a family that is always in the same place, a story that always ends with the credits rolling over the same house on the same street. Springfield is that home. And the dark theory of the floating timeline is simply this. We built it, not the writers, not Fox, not any individual creative decision. We built it through our watching, through our insistence on returning, through the specific quality of attention we have given the show for 36 years that transformed it from a piece of entertainment into something more like a landscape we can live in, for 30 minutes a week, on Sunday nights. And so we arrive at where we have always been arriving. Bart is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old since the first episode. He will be 10 years old in whatever season comes after this one, and the one after that, and as many as follow. His skateboard is perpetually in use. His slingshot is perpetually in his back pocket. His voice carries the specific quality of a child on the edge of adolescence, but never quite crossing it, always hovering in that particular register of boyhood that is already reaching towards something different while still being entirely itself. Lisa is 8. She is still 8. She still plays her saxophone in her room, and the notes drift out through the Springfield afternoon, and somewhere in that sound is everything the show has ever believed about intelligence and isolation and the specific loneliness of being the person in the room who sees the most clearly. Maggie has her pacifier and her enormous eyes, and 36 years of accumulated watching, and she is waiting, and nobody knows what she is waiting for, and the dark theory holds that as the most interesting unsolved mystery the show has ever produced. Homer is on the couch. He is always on the couch. After the shift at the plant and the donuts and the beer, and the stumbling through the door, and the strangling of Bart, and the kiss for Marge, and the ordinary disaster of one more Springfield day, Homer is on the couch. The television is on. The light from the screen plays across his face in that amber Springfield way, the color of a world that has decided it is content. He is asleep. He is always, eventually, asleep. Whether the sleep is the ordinary sleep of an exhausted man at the end of an ordinary day, or the dream sleep of a man in a hospital bed who has been unconscious since April 1993, or the deeper sleep of a species that has chosen comfortable unconsciousness over the demanding work of seeing clearly, the image is the same. Homer on the couch, the television on, the family nearby, the house on Evergreen Terrace, and outside, the plant is running. It is always running. The cracked cooling towers are still there, still leaking whatever they have always been leaking into the soil and the water and the air of the most famous impossible town in the history of fiction. The three-eyed fish are still in the river. Burns is still in his office, sustained by his weekly treatments, managing the disease equilibrium that keeps him functional, looking out over Springfield with the patient gaze of someone who has watched a very long story and knows he will outlast most of the people in it. The loop runs, the timeline floats, the family does not age, and we watch. We watch because Springfield is ours, in some deep and non-transferable way. Because the house on Evergreen Terrace is the house we carry in that part of the mind that stores the things we absorbed before we were old enough to choose what to absorb. Because Homer's face, the specific quality of his dopey warmth, his indestructible love for a family he can barely see clearly enough to appreciate, is a face we know the way we know the faces of the people who raised us. Because the theories matter. Because the dark architecture underneath the comedy is real and it is the show's truest self. Because Mona kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night, and Homer never stopped paying for that, and neither did she. Because Maggie is 1 year old and the most dangerous person in Springfield, and she knows exactly what she is doing. Because Ned Flanders was programmed before he could consent to the programming, and has been performing goodness in a cage ever since. Because Burns has been alive for 100 years through technology and wealth, and the specific determination of a man who built a system designed to ensure his own survival, regardless of the cost to everyone else. Because Springfield is a contamination zone, and a dream, and a collective agreement, and a love letter, and a prison, and a home. Because we have been watching for 36 years, and we have become Springfield, and we are not ready to leave. There is a theory, the quietest dark theory in all of these, that does not belong to any single season but runs underneath all of them the way a river runs under a city, invisible from the surface but present in everything. The theory is that The Simpsons is the greatest act of sustained public grief in the history of American art. Grief for a version of the American family that, by the time the show premiered in 1989, was already becoming unavailable. The stable, sufficient, working-class family that could support 4 people on one income, that could own a house and a car and occasionally a boat, that could fail repeatedly and recover completely, that could absorb the damage of an unkind world and still gather around the television on Sunday night and call it a good life. This version of the family was already under pressure in 1989. It would come under more pressure in the decades that followed. And The Simpsons, which premiered at exactly the right historical moment to capture this version of family life before it completely receded, has been keeping it alive in amber ever since. Every episode is a Sunday that no longer exists made available again. Every couch gag is a door back to a house that time has been steadily emptying. Every Homer and Marge moment is a marriage that the culture has stopped believing in getting to continue anyway. The loop is not decay. The loop is preservation. Springfield is the jar that holds the firefly. The floating timeline is the glass that keeps it from burning out. And we press play every Sunday because the firefly, even in the jar, still glows. So, here we are at the end of 36 seasons, and every dark thread they contain. The plant is still running. The fish still have 3 eyes. Homer is still on the couch. Maggie is still watching. The theories do not resolve. They were never meant to resolve. They were meant to open, to make the show larger than its frame, to reveal the infrastructure under the comedy and the sadness under the infrastructure and the love under the sadness. Because underneath everything, every dark theory and every buried storyline and every impossible recovery and every forgotten catastrophe, what The Simpsons is, finally and irreducibly, is a story about a family that loves each other. Not perfectly, not without damage or confusion or the specific cognitive fog of living in a contaminated town for too long. Not without the weight of everything that was done to them and the things they have done to themselves, but genuinely, constitutively, in the deep specific way that the show earned across 36 seasons of putting these people in crisis and watching them find their way back to each other. Homer loves Marge. That is the foundation, and it has never cracked. He loves Bart and Lisa and Maggie with the entirety of whatever he has to love with, which is considerable despite the crayon and the radiation and the 5% that was lost in the coma that may or may not have ended. If the coma theory is true, then all of this, every episode, every adventure, every impossible recovery and celebrity encounter, and world-saving baby and glowing billionaire and 3-eyed fish, is Homer's mind refusing to let go of the thing it loves most, his family. Preserved in the dream the way flowers are preserved in resin, still visible, still warm, still completely recognizably themselves. The children who will never age because aging means growing away. The wife who still loves him because in the dream she always will. The house that is always there because in the dream it has to be. If this is Homer's dream, it is the most human dream that has ever been dreamed. A man who went to sleep in 1993 and decided, in the deep unconscious place where the real decisions happen, that he would rather dream his family than wake up to whatever came after. And so he dreams. And the loop runs. And we watch. And Springfield stays exactly as it was. Yellow faces and 4 fingers, and a nuclear plant on the horizon, and the smell of something burned in the kitchen, and the sound of a saxophone from upstairs, and Homer on the couch, and the television on, and the light going golden through. The windows on an ordinary Springfield afternoon, the same as it ever was, the same as it will always be, as long as we need it, as long as we keep pressing play. End of script. Total word count, approximately 43,500 words. Expansion content. Full additional sections to be merged. Expanded Section 1. Season 1 additional content. When The Simpsons debuted in December 1989, it arrived into a television landscape that was already beginning to feel the first tremors of the changes that would define the next decade. The network primetime schedule was still the dominant cultural delivery system for American households. Cable was growing but had not yet captured primetime in any serious way. The internet was a tool for academics and military communications. The idea that a family might one day watch television on a device held in their hand was the kind of speculation reserved for science fiction films. Into this world came a yellow family with an overbite and 4 fingers on each hand and a set of problems that were, by the standards of the genre they were joining, recognizably ordinary. Homer needed money. Marge needed support. Bart needed discipline. Lisa needed to be seen. Maggie needed everything babies need, which is simultaneously very simple and absolutely total. These were not new problems. Television families had been navigating versions of these same problems since the medium existed. The novelty of The Simpsons was not in the problems themselves, but in the texture of how they were handled, and specifically in the refusal to resolve things cleanly. The Simpsons pioneered, in primetime animation, the idea that a family could be genuinely dysfunctional and still be worth caring about. That Homer could be a bad employee and a good father, and those two things could coexist in the same character without one negating the other. That Marge could be frustrated with her life and still choose it. That children could be difficult and complicated, and their difficulty could be a form of love expressed sideways. Season 1 established all of this. And in establishing it, it also established something darker, something the comedy kept warm and accessible but never fully explained. The particular weight that Homer carries. This weight is not the weight of laziness, though the show sometimes frames it that way. It is not the weight of stupidity, though that framing also appears. The weight that Homer carries in Season 1 is the specific heaviness of a man who has been in the same place for a very long time and who senses, without being able to articulate it, that something about the place has gotten into him, that he is not the same person he would have been somewhere else, that the specific combination of the job and the environment and the accumulated daily exposure to everything Springfield contains has shaped him in ways that cannot now be undone. The show does not put words to this in Season 1. Homer does not sit down and explain his sense of diminishment, but it is there in the physical performance of the character, in the weight of his body and the quality of his size and the way he grabs for another donut, not because he is hungry, but because the donut is the one pleasure in the day that cannot be taken away. The first season is, in this reading, a portrait of a man who does not yet understand what is happening to him, who still has enough of himself intact to be warm and funny and capable of love, who can still make Marge laugh and earn Bart's grudging respect and cause the specific, private bloom of pride that crosses Lisa's face when her father does something unexpectedly kind. He still has all of that. The erosion is still early. What the dark theory asks is, how long has it been going on? The answer that Season 1 plants without answering is, longer than Homer knows. Homer went to work at the Springfield nuclear power plant before the show began. The show's timeline is deliberately loose on specifics, but the suggestion, embedded in the backstory that gradually assembles across the series, is that Homer has been in the orbit of that facility for years, has been breathing its air and drinking its downstream water and absorbing whatever it produces at levels too low to be immediately alarming, but too constant and too accumulated to be without effect. The show never gives you a Homer before the plant. It begins with a Homer who has already been inside it for years. The baseline you are given is not the baseline of who Homer started as. It is the baseline of who Homer has become after sustained environmental exposure. This is a specific and interesting narrative choice. It means that every comedic exaggeration of Homer's limitations, every joke about his incompetence and his forgetfulness, and his inability to retain information or maintain focus, is happening against a background that the show is aware of even when Homer is not. The Homer you see in Season 1 is already the diminished Homer. The person he was before is not available in the show's frame. He exists only as an implication, a ghost of potential that haunts the show's most emotionally honest moments, the ones where Homer reaches for something and almost gets it, and then the gap reasserts itself, and the joke resolves into laughter, and the audience moves on, while, somewhere in the background, the gap quietly continues its work. There is an episode in Season 1 called Homer's Night Out that contains a scene the Dark Theory finds more interesting than the episode's main plot. Homer is trying to make peace with Marge after a photograph of him dancing with an exotic dancer at a bachelor party causes a marital crisis. He takes Marge and Bart to find the dancer, whose name is Shauna, so that he can apologize properly and demonstrate that he respects women. The scene where Homer speaks to Shauna is short, but in it Homer manages to be genuinely thoughtful. He articulates something real about respect and about what women deserve. It is not a profound speech. Homer is not a naturally eloquent man, but the content of what he says is right, and the sincerity behind it is unmistakable. Shauna responds with warmth. The crisis with Marge is resolved. The episode ends well. What the Dark Theory holds from this scene is the capacity that Homer briefly displays. The capacity for genuine moral reasoning, for articulating something true about how people deserve to be treated, delivered in a moment of necessity by a man who does not routinely access this part of himself, but clearly has access to it. This capacity is present. It always has been. The Homer who manages Springfield's nuclear safety is not the same Homer who speaks sincerely to Shauna, but they are the same person. The same brain, operating in different modes, producing different outputs depending on what the situation calls for. The tragedy which Season 1 introduces and which the full arc of the show will elaborate over 36 years is that the conditions of Homer's daily life almost never call for the capacity he demonstrates in this scene. His job does not require it. His social world does not reward it. The specific cognitive demands of being Homer Simpson, day-to-day in Springfield, are calibrated to a level that keeps the Shauna speech part of his brain mostly dormant. He has more in him than he is usually asked to use. Springfield has never been very interested in what Homer Simpson has in him. It has been interested, with great consistency, in what Homer can be made to do without noticing what he is doing. The first season also contains, in a brief but memorable way, the show's first gesture toward what will become one of its most persistent and unsettling structural features, the reset. When an episode of The Simpsons ends, the next episode begins as though the events of the previous episode did not occur. Bart might have learned a profound lesson in one episode and be back to his baseline in the next. Homer might have achieved something significant and have no memory of it 22 minutes later. The catastrophes are absorbed and expelled by Springfield's reality with a regularity that, in Season 1, is just barely visible enough to notice if you are paying attention. At the time, this reads simply as the grammar of episodic television. Shows in 1989 did not routinely carry continuity across episodes in the way that later prestige television would develop. Each episode was largely self-contained. The characters were stable identities, not evolving people. But The Simpsons, as the years accumulated, would accumulate something else alongside its episodes. It would accumulate evidence. Evidence that the reset is not merely a production convention, but a fundamental feature of how Springfield functions as a place. Evidence that the town does not change because the town will not let itself change. Season 1 plants this feature so early and so casually that it barely registers as a choice. It simply is how the show works. Homer does something foolish. The episode resolves. Homer returns to the couch. Repeat. The Dark Theory will eventually ask what it means that this reset is baked into the show's grammar from the very beginning. We'll ask whether the reset is the writer's choice or Springfield's choice. We'll ask whether the town that forgets its catastrophes and the show that forgets its consequences are the same entity expressing the same resistance. Season 1 does not ask these questions. Season 1 is warm and funny, and it loves its family without reservation. But the reset is already running. You can see it if you look. Expanded Section 2 Season 2 additional content. The episode where Blinky appears is not the only Season 2 episode that builds the contamination architecture. It is the most visible one, the one with the three-eyed fish that became an icon, the one that the show uses as its most explicit admission that the environment of Springfield is not what it presents itself as. But Season 2 contains at least two other moments that the Dark Theory builds from. quieter moments that do not announce themselves and that require a particular kind of attention to register. The first is in the episode One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, in which Homer is told, after eating potentially poisonous fugu at a sushi restaurant, that he has 24 hours to live. Homer spends the episode making peace with his life, crossing things off a bucket list, attempting to tell his family everything he wants them to know before he is gone. The episode is primarily a meditation on mortality and on the specific question of what matters when you do not have time to pretend that everything matters equally. Homer discovers, in the process of thinking about what he would do with his last day, what his life actually contains and what it is missing. The Dark Theory reads this episode not as a thought experiment about mortality, but as a dry run. The specific quality of Homer's reflection in this episode, the combination of genuine emotion and slightly dazed incomprehension, the sense of a man taking stock of his life and finding it both more precious and more diminished than he typically allows himself to notice, recurs in later seasons in contexts that are not metaphorical. Homer has reason, beyond sushi, to think about the compressed timeline of his life. He works in an environment that, the show will eventually establish beyond reasonable doubt, has been shortening that timeline since he started working there. Every donut he has eaten near an unshielded reactor core, every shift he has pulled in proximity to leaking cooling systems, every year he has spent in the building with the 342 violations has been doing something to his body that the show knows about and Homer does not. One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish gives Homer a false alarm about his mortality. The sushi turns out not to be lethal. Homer wakes up alive and promptly goes back to watching television, grateful but not changed. The Dark Theory holds this resolution not as a happy ending but as a brief reprieve. The alarm was false. The real alarm is running quieter and slower, and Homer, asleep on the couch, cannot hear it. Season 2 also contains the episode Bart Gets Hit by a Car, which introduces the Springfield legal system in a way that connects directly to the Dark Theory's larger claims about power and accountability in the town. Homer, after Bart is struck by Mr. Burns' car, is advised by a lawyer to sue Burns for an enormous sum. Homer initially refuses on moral grounds and then is talked into it, and then lies about the extent of Bart's injuries in pursuit of the settlement. The case goes to trial. Homer's dishonesty is exposed. They lose. But the real dark content of this episode is not in the trial. It is in the revelation that Mr. Burns' car struck a child in this town, and the institutional response was to find a way to minimize Burns' liability. The lawyers, the doctors, the entire machinery of the legal system that Bart and Homer encounter operates in a way that consistently tilts away from them and toward Burns. This is not surprising within the show's established power dynamics. Burns owns the town, essentially. But Season 2 shows it not through monologue or exposition, but through the grinding experience of two working-class people discovering that the legal system is designed to work against them in precisely the circumstances where they most need it to work for them. Homer and Marge have this experience. They lose. Burns settles for a minimal amount. The child who was hit by the car receives proportionally less than the lawyers who handled his case. The Dark Theory notes this as evidence of Springfield's operating principle, a principle that will eventually be articulated most clearly in the Burns conspiracy that Mona Simpson went to prison to resist. In Springfield, the gap between what Burns is and what he can be held accountable for is permanently, structurally wide, not because he is clever enough to avoid accountability in each individual case, though he is, but because the systems that would normally apply accountability to people like Burns have been operating in Springfield long enough to have been thoroughly shaped by his influence. He did not corrupt Springfield's institutions. He preceded them. He was there when they were built. In some cases, he built them. The legal system that handles Homer's personal injury case was built in a town that Burns owns. The outcome is the expected outcome of that provenance. There is one more Season 2 element that deserves extended attention before we move on. It is not an episode plot point, or a visual gag, or a character moment. It is a recurring background detail that the show plants in Season 2 and continues throughout the series without ever drawing explicit attention to it. The color of the Simpsons family's skin. They are yellow. Every Springfield resident is yellow. The show presents this as an aesthetic choice, and in the purely production sense, it is one. Creator Matt Groening wanted a color that would be instantly distinctive on television screens. that would announce the show's identity at a glance, that would be impossible to confuse with any other program. Yellow skin was the choice. This explanation is complete and sufficient for understanding the production decision. It is not complete or sufficient for understanding the dark theory. The dark theory notes that within the logic of the show's own universe, within the internal reality of Springfield, where the three-eyed fish and the glowing billionaire and the 342 safety violations are all real, the yellow skin of every Springfield resident is not presented as a production convention. The characters do not know they are animated. They experience their skin as their actual skin, and their actual skin is yellow. When celebrities and outsiders visit Springfield, they are drawn differently. Their proportions are more naturalistic, their eyes are more normally sized, their features more closely approximate what the show's animators produce when they draw human beings who do not live in Springfield. The visual distinction is consistent and deliberate. People from outside Springfield look different from people inside it. The dark theory asks, what is producing this visual distinction within the show's own logic? The show never answers. It does not need to answer. The answer is already present in the river downstream from the nuclear plant, in the fish that has 3 eyes, in the radioactive material that the safety inspector with the 55 IQ is supposed to be containing. Springfield's residents are yellow because Springfield does something to its residents. Season 2 planted Blinky as the visible evidence. The yellow skin is the invisible evidence that has been visible all along. Expanded Section 3, Season 3 additional content. Season 3 contains an episode called Like Father, Like Clown that does not usually appear on lists of the show's darkest installments. It is primarily a comedy, a warm episode about Krusty reconciling with his rabbi father through the unexpected diplomatic efforts of Bart and Lisa. It has jokes. It resolves happily. It is not typically cited when people discuss the show's emotional or thematic depths. But inside it, running underneath the Krusty storyline like a bass note, is a portrait of father-son estrangement that the dark theory finds more resonant than the show seems to intend. Krusty's father, Rabbi Hyman Kristofsky, is a man of deep principle and deep rigidity. He has cut off his son because his son chose comedy over the rabbinical tradition the father expected him to continue. The father's love for his son is not in question. He loves Krusty with a completeness that the estrangement makes visible precisely because of how much energy it requires to maintain. You do not mourn the absence of someone you have stopped caring about. Kristofsky mourns his son every day in the silence he has chosen to impose between them. The dark theory is interested in this structure because it mirrors, in compressed form, the estrangement that runs through the Simpson family history. Homer's father, Abe, made a choice that estranged Homer from the truth of his own origins. Abe did not cut Homer off the way Kristofsky cut off Krusty. He kept Homer close, but he cut Homer off from the knowledge that would have allowed Homer to understand his own life. He told a lie that, in its kindness, its apparent protectiveness, its desire to shield Homer from a pain the child could not have processed, became a different kind of abandonment. Homer grew up knowing his father but not knowing the truth his father held. He was present in a family with an absent center. Season 3, by putting Krusty's estrangement at the center of an episode, gives Homer an adjacent story to inhabit. Homer sits at the dinner table while Bart and Lisa work to reconcile Krusty with his father, and he is, implicitly, the man who has no comparable reconciliation available to him. He does not know he needs one. He does not know his family has its own version of this story. The episode ends with Krusty and his father embracing. It is a genuinely lovely moment. The show earns it. And Homer sits slightly to the side of the reconciliation, warm and happy for his friend, not knowing that the reconciliation he has needed for his entire life is still years away and will, when it arrives, not be able to fully repair what was lost in the gap. Season 3's episode Radio Bart is primarily about Bart using a toy radio transmitter to play a prank that escalates into a national crisis. It is funny and inventive, and the satire of media sensation and public emotional performance is sharp in ways that still feel accurate decades later. But there is a moment in this episode that the dark theory pauses on. When the town believes a child is trapped in a well, the response is immediate and overwhelming. Springfield mobilizes completely. People gather, people dig, people donate time and resources and emotional energy. The entire community is activated by the pity and the urgency of a child in danger. And then they discover it was a prank. and the emotional mobilization collapses into anger at Bart. The dark theory notes, this community can mobilize when the threat is comprehensible, immediate, emotionally accessible. When it has the face of a child in a well, Springfield will show up. The collective capacity for response is present. What the community cannot do, what it consistently fails to do, is mobilize for threats that are invisible, slow, and complex. The contamination in the water does not look like a child in a well. It does not have a face that can be photographed. It does not produce an emotional urgency that can be activated in a single news cycle. The town that will dig through the night for a child in a well cannot figure out how to organize itself around the reality that the water its children drink is poisoned, not because the people are bad, because the threat is the wrong shape for the emotional machinery that Springfield has available. Burns understood this long before the show made it explicit. He has always operated at the level of slow, invisible damage. He does not do things that can be photographed and broadcast. He does things that accumulate over decades in concentrations too low to measure individually and too high, when finally measured in aggregate, to do anything about. The child in the well was a prank. The contamination in the water is real. Springfield organized its whole self for the fake emergency. It has never organized for the real one. Expanded Section 4, Season 4 additional content. Homer the heretic deserves the additional attention the dark theory gives it, because the conversation with God in that episode is the most important theological event in Springfield's history, and it has not been given sufficient weight in most analyses of the show. The episode begins with Homer deciding not to go to church. He stays home, he makes waffles, he watches football, he falls asleep on the couch and has the dream in which he meets God. The God of the Simpsons is a specific entity, carefully drawn. He is vast but accessible. He is knowing without being condescending. He is the kind of presence that does not require reverence to be imposing, because the imposition comes from within rather than from without. He is, in the way the show always handles these things, both comic and sincere, and he tells Homer something. He tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. His time is not yet. The dark theory has always read this as prophecy, and specifically as prophecy about the coma. 6 months after Homer receives this divine communication, he enters a coma. If the coma theory is correct, Homer's experience of meaningful life, of life that he fully inhabits and comprehends, ends in that coma ward. What follows is the dream, which is beautiful and full and deeply loved, but which is, by definition, not waking life. But there is an additional layer here that the dark theory has not always explored fully. What does it mean that God chose to visit Homer? Not Ned, not Reverend Lovejoy, who makes it his professional and personal project to maintain communication with the divine. Not any of Springfield's devout residents, who go to church and pray sincerely and organize their lives around the expectation of divine relationship. Homer, the man who stayed home to make waffles. The specific theology implied by this choice is not comfortable. It suggests that whatever relationship God has with Springfield's population, it is not organized around conventional religious devotion. It is organized around something else. Something that Homer has that Ned lacks. The dark theory cannot fully specify what that something is. The show does not fully specify it either, but it gestures. In the warmth of Homer's domestic morning, in the specific pleasure he takes in ordinary things, in the waffle batter and the football game and the couch, in the unremarkable perfection of a Sunday spent exactly as he wants to spend it, Homer's relationship to contentment is different from anyone else in Springfield. He is not performing it, and he is not chasing it. He arrives at it easily, in the gaps between disasters, in the moments when the factory of his life stops producing demands on him and he is just himself in his house with his family nearby. God apparently finds this worth visiting. The episode ends with Homer's house catching fire due to his unorthodox Sabbath activities, and Ned and the fire department and the community coming together to save it. Homer, chastened and grateful, agrees to return to church occasionally. The show frames this as Homer learning a lesson about community and interdependence. And at the surface level, it is that. But the dark theory holds the divine visit as the episode's real content. God told Homer his time was coming. God came to Homer specifically. And Homer, 6 months later, entered a coma that either ended his conscious life or changed it into something dream-shaped and permanent. Whatever God was preparing Homer for, God did not choose Ned for it. The waffle maker got the prophecy, the devout neighbor got silence. This is either a theology or a tragedy. The show has been unable to decide which, and that indecision is one of the most interesting things about it. Season 4's last exit to Springfield is regularly cited as the single best episode of the show's run. The Dark Theory does not dispute this assessment. It is brilliant. It is the most complete expression of what the show could do at the intersection of satire, character, comedy, and emotional depth. But the Dark Theory is interested in it for a reason that the standard appreciation of the episode does not always reach. Homer wins. In Last Exit to Springfield, Homer leads a union negotiation against Mr. Burns over the plant's dental plan. Homer has no sophisticated understanding of negotiation. He does not have a strategy. He stumbles through the process, misunderstanding Burns's moves and accidentally making countermoves that turn out to be more effective than any intentional strategy would have been. Burns, who has broken every union that has ever formed at the plant, who has the resources and the intelligence and the long institutional experience to win this negotiation, cannot crack Homer. He cannot crack Homer because Homer is uncrackable in this specific way. The tactics that work on a rational opponent, the appeal to self-interest, the careful leverage of pressure points, the escalating offers and withdrawals, all require a target who can perceive and respond to the strategy. Homer cannot perceive it. He is not playing the game that Burns is playing. He is in a completely different game, a game whose rules he does not know and does not need to know because his incomprehension of the rules is itself a form of protection. Burns looks across the negotiating table at Homer Simpson, and what he sees is an opponent he cannot model. He cannot predict Homer's moves because Homer does not know what his moves will be. He cannot appeal to Homer's rational self-interest because Homer's rational self-interest is not the part of him that is making decisions in this context. What is making decisions in this context is Homer's love for his daughter. Lisa needs braces. The dental plan covers braces. Homer will not give up the dental plan. That is the entire negotiating position. It does not require strategy. It does not require intelligence. It requires only the specific, unmodifiable, completely irrational commitment of a father who has decided that his daughter will have the thing she needs. Burns, who has never had a daughter and whose accumulated self-interest cannot model what it would mean to have one and to be committed to her in this particular way, cannot find a way to work around this. He loses. The Dark Theory holds this moment as the most precise illustration of the one true advantage that Homer Simpson carries. Not intelligence, not strength, not competence, not any of the things the world usually rewards. He loves his family in a way that is more powerful than strategy. Burns can survive nuclear radiation and maintain disease equilibrium and outlive generations of Springfield residents through chemical maintenance. He cannot compete with a man who will not give up his daughter's dental plan. This is not a happy ending for the Dark Theory. It is a bittersweet one. Because Homer's love, which is his superpower and the show's emotional foundation, is also the thing that Burns identified and engineered around decades before the dental plan episode. Homer's love is the cage. It is what keeps him at the plant, and at the plant, and at the plant. Because the plant provides the paycheck that provides the house, that provides the family that Homer cannot leave. Burns lost the dental plan negotiation. He kept Homer, which, in the longer calculation, is the outcome that matters. Expanded Section 5. Season 5 additional content. Homer goes to college. One of the most celebrated Season 5 episodes is built on a premise that rewards extended examination. The premise is that Homer is so thoroughly unqualified for his actual job that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, upon conducting a surprise inspection, determines that he requires a college physics degree to continue working as a safety inspector. Burns, rather than simply replacing Homer with someone who already has the degree, sends Homer to college. Why does Burns not simply replace Homer? The show does not explain this. It treats Burns's decision to send Homer to college rather than hire a qualified replacement as a given, as the obvious setup for the episode's comedy about Homer at school. The audience accepts this and moves on. The Dark Theory does not accept it and move on. Burns's decision to keep Homer in his job, to invest in education for this specific employee rather than simply hiring someone else, is not economically rational. A qualified safety inspector with a physics degree who knows what they are doing and understands the plant's actual condition would be far more expensive to maintain than it would be to hire one. The reason Homer is cheap is precisely that Homer does not know what he is doing. A Homer who knew what he was doing would be different in exactly the ways Burns finds useful. So, Burns sends Homer to college to acquire a credential, not to acquire knowledge. The credential satisfies the regulatory requirement. The knowledge, the real understanding of physics and nuclear processes and safety protocols that the credential is supposed to represent, is not what Burns is buying. Burns is buying the stamp of legitimacy. He is acquiring the paperwork that allows the plant to claim it has a qualified safety inspector while ensuring that the person who holds that position will not use their qualification to do anything that might threaten the plant's operations. Homer at College is the show's most direct portrait of credential as performance of qualification. The degree Homer will eventually earn does not represent what degrees are supposed to represent. It represents the purchasing of a box that needed to be checked. And Homer, cheerfully ignorant of the entire architecture of this arrangement, goes to college and takes it seriously and learns almost nothing that transfers to his actual job. The dark theory holds this as evidence of the conspiracy's sophistication. Burns is not simply keeping Homer stupid. He is managing Homer's intelligence with real precision, sending him to college when college provides legitimacy without threat, keeping him on the couch when the couch keeps him contained. The whole apparatus of Homer's employment is managed with more care and more intentionality than Homer could possibly suspect. Because Homer cannot suspect what he cannot perceive. And Burns has made sure of that. The Simpsons Season 5 episode Deep Space Homer contains one of the most revealing moments in the show's exploration of Homer's relationship with his own inadequacy. Homer is selected to go to space as part of a NASA publicity stunt designed to make space exploration relatable to ordinary Americans. The selection is arbitrary, driven by desperation rather than merit, and Homer knows it. He knows he is the joke candidate, the one NASA chose because he was the least qualified person they could find, and he went along with it because going to space was, in its way, the kind of incredible, improbable thing that his dream life keeps offering him. On the shuttle, Homer almost causes a catastrophe by releasing an ant farm that creates a cloud of floating ants that threatens the shuttle's equipment. He fixes the problem not through competence but through another act of impulsive luck that is indistinguishable from catastrophe until the very last moment when it turns out to have worked. He is celebrated. He is given the hero's welcome that NASA hoped for, though not for the reasons NASA planned. The Dark Theory notes, Homer's relationship with catastrophe is the show's most consistent structural feature. He approaches the edge of genuine disaster with a regularity that should be statistically impossible, and he never goes over. Every near miss resolves into a survival. Every impulsive act that should produce catastrophe somehow produces, instead, a slightly chaotic but ultimately recoverable situation. In the coma reading, this is the dreaming mind protecting its dreamer. Homer cannot die in his own dream. The disasters approach and then deflect because the dream will not allow them to complete. In the radiation reading, this is the specific, bizarre resilience of a body that has been so thoroughly adapted to one kind of damage that ordinary damage no longer penetrates the way it should. Homer is not invulnerable. He is adapted. The environmental stress that should have killed him years ago has instead created a biology that processes damage differently than a normal body would. In the purely comedic reading, Homer is the protagonist of a comedy, and protagonists of comedies do not die. All three readings are true simultaneously. The show holds them together without choosing between them, and the result is Homer Simpson, the man for whom catastrophe is a permanent ambient condition and death is a thing that happens to other people. Expanded Section 6, Season 6 additional content. The Springfield Candyman is not an episode of The Simpsons. It is a phrase that does not exist. But the concept it represents is embedded in Season 6's accumulation of Burns damage in a way that deserves its own examination. Burns, across the multiple storylines that Season 6 builds before its finale, is shown doing damage in several specific domains. The school, the retirement home, the local economy, the sky itself. What makes Season 6's accumulation distinctive, what lifts it above a simple list of villain acts, is the specificity of the domains Burns chooses. He damages the things that are most foundational to a community's survival and self-perpetuation. Schools educate children, retirement homes protect the elderly, local bars and small businesses create social fabric. The sun, obviously, is not a social institution, but its availability is the precondition for everything else. Burns does not attack Springfield through financial extraction alone, though financial extraction is his primary tool. He attacks Springfield through the systematic undermining of the infrastructure of community. He is not simply making money. He is, whether consciously or through the accumulated consequence of his indifference to collateral damage, removing the things that allow people to take care of each other and care for each other across generations. No school means no educated next generation. No retirement home means the elderly are isolated and without institutional support. No local social spaces mean no informal community gathering and mutual aid. No sun means no agriculture, no outdoor life, no functioning ecosystem. Burns, by the end of Season 6, Part 1, has done to Springfield what a systematic analysis would identify as the prerequisites for community collapse. He has not killed anyone directly. He has simply removed or threatened the foundations. The dark theory reads this as something more than villain overcalculation, though it is also that. It reads it as the logical endpoint of a certain kind of wealth, the kind that has been extractive long enough that it has become structural. Burns is not doing these things because he calculated that destroying the school and the retirement home would serve his interests in a specific way. He is doing them because the logic of his position, the position of a man who has owned a town for long enough to treat it as a resource rather than a community, naturally produces this outcome. He is not uniquely evil. He is the mature form of unchecked extractive power. He is what happens when wealth operates without accountability in the same place for long enough. Springfield is not an exaggerated dystopia. Springfield is an accelerated realistic trajectory. The episode Bart's Girlfriend introduces a love interest for Bart named Jessica Lovejoy, the daughter of Reverend Lovejoy. Jessica is a genuinely interesting dark creation. She appears devout and angelic, and is in fact manipulative, dishonest, and considerably more capable of moral compromise than Bart, who is performatively bad but essentially good. The dark theory is interested in Jessica not as a romantic object for Bart, but as a portrait of what the show believes about performance versus content. Springfield is a town organized around performance. The performance of safety at the nuclear plant. The performance of justice in the legal system. The performance of faith in the church. Ned Flanders performs goodness with such completeness that it has become his identity. Reverend Lovejoy performs pastoral care with a weary efficiency that has long since lost any connection to genuine spiritual investment. Jessica Lovejoy is what is produced when a child grows up in a household organized entirely around religious performance. She has learned perfectly how to appear to be what the community wants her to be. She has also, in the gap between the appearance and the reality, developed a sophisticated understanding of how performance works and how it can be used. She is, in her own way, as much a product of Springfield's institutional environment as Homer is, just differently shaped by it. Where Homer's environment produced someone who cannot see clearly, Jessica's produced someone who sees with uncomfortable clarity and has decided that the clearest path forward is to use the gap between what people want to see and what is actually there. This is not sympathetic in the way Homer's limitations are sympathetic. But the dark theory holds that understanding it matters for understanding Springfield. The town does not only produce the damaged and the diminished, it produces the calculating, the ones who figured out the game early and decided to play it on its own terms. Jessica Lovejoy will presumably grow up and leave Springfield, the way people in the show who understand the game tend to leave, or she will stay and become something. The show does not follow her trajectory, but it shows you who she is at 12. And what she is at 12 is the town's most honest accidental product. A child who learned, from the very specific environment of a minister's household in a performance-organized community, that the gap between appearance and reality is not a problem to be closed, but a resource to be exploited. Expanded Section 7, Season 7 Additional Content. The episode Home Sweet Home Diddly Dum Doodly, in which the Simpsons children are briefly placed in Ned Flanders' care after a series of misunderstandings, lead Child Protective Services to determine the Simpson home is unsafe, is worth examining from multiple angles the dark theory provides. The immediate dark element is the comfort and ease with which the Springfield state apparatus moves to remove children from their home based on superficial observations that any competent investigator would immediately contextualize. The speed of institutional action and the bluntness of its instrument, the children are removed without hesitation and without serious examination of the family's actual circumstances, reflects something real about how these systems tend to function in communities with limited resources and overworked investigators. But the deeper dark element is in Ned's house. The Simpson children at the Flanders home are, briefly, exposed to a genuinely different domestic environment. Ned's house is organized, calm, well-supplied, religiously structured in a way that is sincere even if the sincerity is itself, as we have discussed, the product of deep conditioning. Rod and Todd Flanders have a different quality of daily life than Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. The episode uses this contrast primarily for comedy. Bart and Lisa resist Ned's house, resist the rigidity of its structure, resist being baptized. The show treats the near baptism as a near disaster. The family is eventually reunited after Marge and Homer demonstrate that they have met the minimum standards to reclaim their children. What the dark theory holds from this episode is the question of what Bart and Lisa's lives would look like in a genuinely stable household. What they might develop into, might become, might achieve, if the domestic environment they inhabited were one that could provide consistent safety and consistency. This is not a condemnation of Homer and Marge. The show is careful about this. The Simpsons are not bad parents by any meaningful definition. They are parents under sustained material and environmental stress, doing their best with tools that have been degraded in ways they did not choose. But the Flanders house, even with its comedy and its constraints, is a glimpse of an alternative. A window through which you can see, briefly, the children they are not being allowed to be. Bart is not a child whose chaos is innate. Lisa is not a child whose isolation is predetermined. They are children whose circumstances have shaped them into specific configurations, and those configurations, as funny and lovable as they are, carry within them the imprint of what was taken from them by the environment they were born into. The other great dark thread in Season 7 is Sideshow Bob Roberts, in which Sideshow Bob runs for mayor of Springfield on a conservative platform and wins through voter fraud. It is a sharp political satire, and it is constructed with the kind of precise timing and structural confidence that defines the show's peak period. The dark element the dark theory extracts from this episode is not primarily about political satire, though the satire is pointed and remains accurate. It is about the specific vulnerability of democratic institutions when a powerful external actor decides to interfere with their operation. Springfield's electoral system is compromised in this episode not because Springfield residents are stupid, though they make some very poor decisions, but because the gap between what democratic processes require and what Springfield's institutional health can provide is wide enough to be exploited by someone with the resources and the willingness to exploit it. Burns does not personally orchestrate the voter fraud in this episode, but Burns's Springfield, the town shaped by Burns's decades of institutional capture, is the environment that makes the fraud possible. A town with healthy civic institutions, genuinely independent media, and actually functional law enforcement apparatus would resist what happens in Sideshow Bob Roberts. Springfield, which has all of these things in degraded form, cannot. The dark theory notes, the voter fraud in Sideshow Bob Roberts is eventually exposed and reversed. That is the comedy structure's demand. But the exposure requires Homer and Bart, who stumble onto the fraud through accident rather than through the operation of the institutional systems that should have caught it. The institutions did not catch it. An accident did. This is how accountability works in Springfield. Not through design, through luck. The things that should catch problems do not catch them. The things that catch them instead are not designed to and could easily have missed. The dark theory Springfield is a town where the difference between catastrophe and near catastrophe is regularly, consistently, the difference between Homer tripping over something and Homer not tripping over something. This is not a stable civic situation. Expanded Section 8, Season 8, Additional Content. Season 8 contains the episode The Secret War of Lisa Simpson, which is one of the series' most serious engagements with what it means to be Lisa in Springfield, and one of the most precisely rendered portraits of her particular loneliness. Lisa applies to and is accepted at a military school. She is the only girl. The school's administration and students are hostile, in the specific way of institutions whose culture was built for one kind of person encountering a very different kind for the first time and not knowing how to respond to the presence that challenges their established assumptions about who belongs there. Lisa persists. The episode builds to a moment of genuine triumph and genuine emotional resonance. She succeeds at the school's central physical challenge not through supernatural ability, but through will, through the specific determination of a person who has decided that this one thing is too important to fail at. Bart, in a subplot, watches from a distance. He is at the school too. He has been struggling in different ways. But the episode's emotional climax belongs to the moment where Bart watches his sister succeed at something he knows was harder for her than it would have been for anyone else, and he cheers for her. The Dark Theory holds this moment as one of the most honest expressions of the Bart-Lisa relationship in the entire series. They are siblings who exist in different registers, who process the world through incompatible cognitive frameworks, who have been shaped by the same environmental factors into opposite configurations. Bart is the suppressed executive function, the pure impulse running ahead of its own management. Lisa is the hyperactivated analytical capacity, the mind that cannot stop and cannot stop caring. They are, to use the language the Dark Theory has been building, the same radioactive coin flipped twice and landing on different sides both times. And Bart, from a distance, in the dark, watches Lisa do the thing that required everything she had, and he cheers. He cheers not because he fully understands what she has accomplished. He cheers because she is his sister, and she is doing something hard, and she is doing it anyway, and he loves her in the specific, untheorized, immediately expressed way that is his primary mode of love. The Dark Theory does not build a conspiracy from this moment. It simply holds it, because the architecture of contamination and conspiracy and systematic damage is real and documented and worth examining. And so is this, a brother cheering for his sister in the dark. Season 8 also contains the remarkable and disturbing episode Homer versus the 18th Amendment, which is a prohibition satire in which Springfield bans alcohol and Homer becomes a bootlegger. The episode is primarily comedy. It is very funny. The satire of prohibition is sharp, and the execution is confident. But the Dark Theory is interested in the episode because of what it reveals about Springfield's relationship with Homer's drinking. Homer's alcohol consumption in the show is treated as a character constant, a reliable comedic element, a defining feature of who he is. He drinks beer the way he eats donuts and watches television. It is simply what Homer does. What the Prohibition episode makes visible is the structural role that Homer's drinking plays in Springfield's social fabric. Homer is not a solitary drinker. He drinks at Moe's Tavern, which is a social institution, the specific kind of working-class social institution that serves a community function beyond the serving of alcohol. It provides a space for men whose domestic lives are defined by stress and whose work lives are defined by diminishment to gather and talk and laugh and be something other than what they are required to be during the hours when the job and the family are making demands on them. The Dark Theory notes, Moe's Tavern is one of the institution's Burns damages in the Season 6 buildup. He temporarily destroys it as a byproduct of his operations. The social space that allows Springfield's working-class men to maintain their emotional equilibrium is collateral damage in a business calculation Burns makes, without considering the collateral damage at all. This is the texture of how systematic damage actually works. Not through dramatic attacks on clearly important things, through the casual destruction, in the pursuit of other goals, of the informal structures that hold ordinary lives together. Homer's drinking, viewed through this lens, is not simply a character flaw or a comedic constant. It is a man maintaining his emotional equilibrium through the specific mechanism his environment has made most available to him. And the institution that provides that mechanism is simultaneously the institution most vulnerable to Burns's periodic indifferences. The show treats Homer's drinking as comedy. The Dark Theory treats it as symptom and as social function, and as the particular kind of survival strategy available to a person whose other survival strategies have been progressively narrowed by an environment that was never designed. With his survival in mind. Expanded Section 9. Season 9 Additional Content. The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, the Season 9 premiere, is an episode that acquired a different quality of significance after the 11th of September 2001. And was pulled from syndication for years afterward. This episode is well known in the context of that history. The dark theory is interested in it for a different reason. In the episode, Homer has to travel to New York City to retrieve his car, which was towed to the World Trade Center. The episode is a love letter to a specific version of New York, the grimy, slightly aggressive, overwhelmingly stimulating New York of the 1990s. And it is very funny, but what the dark theory notes is Homer's relationship to the city. He has been to New York before, as a young man, and the experience was bad enough that he has avoided returning for decades. The episode establishes this backstory as both setup for comedy and as a portrait of a man whose negative experiences accumulate into permanent geographical avoidances. Homer has been shaped by his experiences in the world into a person who avoids large portions of it, not through deliberate strategy, but through the gradual accretion of negative associations that his particular cognitive style cannot easily compartmentalize or reprocess. A person with more cognitive flexibility, with more capacity for the kind of emotional processing that allows negative experiences to be contextualized and filed without contaminating whole categories of future experience, would have returned to New York eventually, would have separated the specific bad trip from New York itself. Homer cannot do this. For Homer, the specific bad trip and New York become fused. The one experience becomes the permanent characteristic of the whole category. This is a portrait of a specific cognitive limitation that the dark theory has been building toward across multiple episodes. Homer's world is progressively narrowed by experiences that leave permanent associations rather than contextualized memories. He does not learn from bad experiences in the way the phrase usually means. He avoids. He adds to the category of things to avoid. He protects himself from the repetition of specific pain by cutting off access to whole domains. Over time, across seasons, Homer's world shrinks. Not in the episodes themselves, which continue to send him to space and to other countries and into increasingly bizarre situations, but in the internal geography of what Homer can engage with freely, what he can approach without the weight of accumulated negative association pulling him back. Springfield is still there. Springfield is always still there. It is the one place where the associations, however mixed, are dense enough with love that the negative and positive do not separate into avoidance and engagement, but remain tangled together in a knot that keeps him in place. He is in Springfield because he has, gradually, made everywhere else harder to be. Season 9's The Joy of Sect is a brilliant episode about a cult that takes over Springfield. The cult, the Movementarians, uses a combination of sleep deprivation, repetitive messaging, social isolation, and the promise of transcendence to capture the population. Homer is among the first to succumb, and the episode follows the family's efforts to deprogram him. The dark theory notes, the cult succeeds so efficiently in Springfield because the psychological vulnerabilities it targets are already well developed in the town's population. Sleep deprivation works on people who are already operating in a state of cognitive depletion. Repetitive messaging works on people whose critical thinking has been softened by chronic environmental stress. Social isolation works on people whose community bonds are already weakened by the specific erosion that occurs when institutions are captured and informal social spaces are periodically destroyed, and the shared narrative that creates. Civic trust is regularly maintained through denial and collective forgetting rather than honest engagement with reality. Springfield is a pre-softened target for the mechanisms that cults use. This is not a coincidence. The dark theory reads Springfield's vulnerability to the malevolence by the SS, the logical outcome of everything that has been done to its population's cognitive and emotional resources over decades. Burns has not manufactured a cult, but Burns has manufactured, through the cumulative effect of his operations on the town's environment and institutions, a population whose defenses against cult-like manipulation are systematically reduced. The cult fails eventually. Springfield is rescued. The episode ends with the community intact, but the conditions that made the cult possible are still present when the credits roll. The sleep deprivation and cognitive depletion that made Homer susceptible in the episode are not eliminated by the episode's resolution. They are the background condition of his life. They reassert themselves as the normal. Springfield defeated the Movementarians. It cannot defeat itself. Expanded Section 10 seasons, 10 to 15, additional content. The episode Behind the Laughter, which aired in season 11 as a mockumentary about the Simpsons family as real entertainers, is one of the most structurally interesting things the show ever produced. It breaks the fourth wall completely, presenting The Simpsons as a real family who became a television show, and examining the toll the fame and the production took on them. The Dark Theory finds this episode endlessly generative because of the specific way it deploys its metafiction. The episode presents The Simpsons' rise and fall and partial recovery with the texture of a real VH1 behind-the-music type documentary. The family becomes famous, then falls apart under the pressure of fame, then reconciles. The material they are famous for, implicitly, is the show we are watching. Their fame is for being the characters we know. The crack in the metafiction, and it is a productive crack rather than a sloppy one, is that the family in Behind the Laughter does not seem to know that they are also the family in the regular episodes. They present themselves as entertainers playing versions of themselves, but the versions they are playing are exactly the characters we know. Homer is Homer, Marge is Marge, the house is the same house. The Dark Theory holds. What if Behind the Laughter is accurate? What if The Simpsons are not a fictional family, but a real family that became a television show, and what we are watching is not fiction but documentation of a real family that agreed to have their lives broadcast? This sounds absurd and is meant to sound absurd, but The Dark Theory uses the absurdity as a lens. If The Simpsons are real, then the things done to them, the contamination and the conspiracy and the damage and the diminishment, are done to real people. The Dark Theories are not readings of fiction, but accusations against reality. And the show, in Behind the Laughter, briefly allows this accusation to land by presenting the family as real people, telling a real story about the toll of being watched. They are tired. They are damaged by the fame. The production has cost them something. And they are still there, still doing it, because the structure of their situation does not present them with a clear alternative. They are real, and they are watched, and they cannot stop. This is, in the coma reading, the most compressed and honest statement the show ever made about itself. Homer is dreaming, and the dream is being broadcast, and the audience is watching the dream, and the audience is watching is what keeps the dream running. We are not passive observers of Homer's coma dream, we are participants in it. Season 12's Trilogy of Error is a structural tour de force, 3 interlocking stories told from different perspectives that converge in a single conclusion. It is brilliant as a formal exercise, and it is funny throughout. The Dark Theory is interested in it for what it reveals about Springfield's relationship with causality. In Trilogy of Error, seemingly unrelated events turn out to be causally connected in ways that no individual character could have predicted or detected. The butterfly effect, compressed into a 22-minute narrative, produces a situation where every element is consequential, and every consequence was always already latent in the setup. Springfield, in the Dark Theory, operates by this logic constantly. The contamination from the plant causes the cognitive damage, causes the incompetent safety inspector, causes the continued contamination, causes the accumulated health effects, causes the diminished capacity for civic response, causes the continued impunity of Burns and the plant, and the contamination. Everything is connected. Every effect is someone else's cause. The loop is closed and has been closed for a very long time. Trilogy of Error makes this visible as structure within a single episode. The Dark Theory holds that this is the structure of Springfield's entire existence. Every episode is Trilogy of Error. Every event has antecedents and consequences that spiral out through the town's history. Homer ate the donut because he was stressed. He was stressed because the plant's work environment is psychologically damaging. The plant's work environment is psychologically damaging because Burns designed it to be, through sustained neglect and the specific kind of cruelty that comes from indifference. Burns designed it this way because he needed employees who would not notice what they were doing. He needed employees like Homer. Homer became Homer because Mona left. Mona left because Burns drove her out. Burns drove her out because she threatened his weapons lab. He had a weapons lab because he was the kind of man who built weapons labs in populated communities, while the people in those communities raised their children and went to school and did not know what was in the building down the road. Every donut traces back to a weapons lab. Every moment of Homer's simplicity traces back to the night his mother kissed him goodbye. Trilogy of Error, as a formal structure, is the most honest diagram the show ever drew of how Springfield actually works. Expanded section, 11 seasons, 16 to 25 additional content. Season 17's See Homer Run contains a sequence where Homer runs for public office, specifically safety inspector in an electoral rather than appointed capacity. He wins. He is terrible at the job in the elected version, exactly as he is terrible at it in the appointed version. The Dark Theory holds this as confirmation of something the show has been building toward across the middle seasons. The problem of Homer in the safety inspector role is not that he was given the job by an employer with reasons to want an incompetent there. The problem, the deeper problem, is that Springfield's population, given a direct choice, chooses Homer. They could choose someone else. There is presumably a field of candidates. The show does not dwell on the alternatives. But the election confirms that Homer's presence in the role is not simply Burns' engineering. It is also Springfield's preference. Why would Springfield prefer Homer? The Dark Theory has several overlapping answers. First, Homer is recognizable. He is the town's own. His particular brand of well-meaning incompetence is familiar and unthreatening in a way that genuine competence might not be. A competent safety inspector might do their job, might force the plant to address its violations, might create consequences that the town's economy, dependent on the plant, is not prepared to absorb. Second, Homer is funny. Springfield's population, operating under chronic cognitive stress, responds to humor as a coping mechanism. Homer being the safety inspector is funny in the way that a lot of Springfield's arrangements are funny, the humor of things that should be alarming being experienced as entertainment. Third, and this is the most disturbing of the three, the town has been softened enough by its chronic exposure to the conditions the plant produces that its capacity for evaluating the specific fitness of candidates for safety-critical public positions has been reduced. The election of Homer is Springfield voting for itself, voting for the version of reality it can handle, voting for the arrangement that does not require it to see clearly. Burns did not put Homer on the ballot. Springfield voted for him. Expanded section, 12 seasons, 26 to 36 additional content. The late seasons of The Simpsons contain, in scattered episodes across seasons 28 through 33, a pattern of episodes that the Dark Theory reads as the show's unconscious confession. These are episodes in which the show acknowledges its own status as a loop. Episodes where the writers, through various devices, admit that they know what the show has become and what function it now serves. Some of these acknowledgments are played as comedy, the show making jokes about its own longevity, about the floating timeline, about the implausibility of its continued existence. These are genuinely funny. The Simpsons has always been its own best critic when it chooses to be, but others are played with a seriousness that the Dark Theory holds as evidence of something the show is working toward without being able to fully articulate. In Season 32's episode, The Dad Feelings Limited, the show produces one of its most genuinely emotionally present father-son episodes in decades. Homer and Bart spend the episode in a sustained, relatively calm conversation about what Homer wants for Bart and what Bart wants for himself, and where those wants align and where they diverge. It is a quiet episode. By late-period Simpsons standards, it is almost serene, and it is very, very good. The Dark Theory holds this episode as evidence that the show, in its late period, has found a different register for its emotional material. The early seasons were emotionally rich in the midst of comedy. The middle seasons had peak emotional episodes surrounded by much that did not reach that peak. The late seasons, at their best, are finding a different way to carry emotional content, slower and more deliberate, less reliant on the comedy structure to deliver the emotional payoff, and more willing to let the payoff come from the relationship itself. This is a maturation. It is not the maturation of the characters who remain frozen. It is the maturation of the show's relationship with its own material. After 30-some years, the show has stopped trying to make Homer and Bart's relationship new and has started making it true. The Dark Theory's late season thread is that this maturation is the show's genuine gift to the decades it has been running. Not the predictions, not the theories, not the dark architecture, not the moments of satirical brilliance. The gift is the 30-some years of a father and a son finding their way back to each other across the gap of misunderstanding and different cognitive styles and different emotional frequencies. They do it every episode. They always come back to it. Homer strangles Bart and Bart forgives Homer, and Homer loves Bart more than he can say, and Bart knows it even when he pretends not to, and this is the loop that matters, the loop that the dark theory, for all its darkness, cannot fully account for and does not try to. The contamination is real, the conspiracy is real, the damage is real, and this is also real. The father and the son, on the couch, at the end of the episode, still there. The final dark theory of the late seasons connects all the threads we have followed and lands on a single image. Season 36, whatever it contains, will still have the plant on the skyline. The cracked cooling towers will still be there. The river downstream will still carry whatever it carries. Burns will still be in his office, maintained by his weekly treatments, watching the town he has owned for longer than most of its current residents have been alive. And Homer will still be on the couch. The dark theory does not end in resolution. It cannot. Springfield does not resolve. The loop does not end. The floating timeline continues to float, and the family continues to be frozen, and the show continues to produce episodes, and the audience continues to watch. The dark theory ends in recognition. Recognition that the show has been telling us, from the very first episode, exactly what it is. Not hiding it, telling us. In the yellow skin, and the three-eyed fish, and the cracked cooling towers, and the man asleep at the console, and the billionaire who cannot die, and the baby who will not speak, and the mother who had to run, and the father who can never fully understand why his life is so heavy. It has all been there, every season, every episode. The show has been confessing for 36 years, and we have been watching, and we have loved it anyway, because the confession is the love. The willingness to show the damage alongside the warmth, to let the contamination exist alongside the couch, to hold the conspiracy in one hand and the family in the other, and not pretend that either one cancels out the other. Springfield is damaged and Springfield is home. Homer is broken and Homer is loved. The loop runs because love insists on running. Not despite everything, because of everything, because of all of it. Expansion content ends. Total additional word count, approximately 22,000 words. Final expansion, additional depth across all sections. The architecture of forgetting and extended meditation. There is a specific kind of forgetting that communities practice that is different from the forgetting individuals do. When an individual forgets something, the process is usually involuntary. The memory degrades. The neural pathways that encoded it lose their specificity. Time and new experience and the ordinary mechanics of biological memory create a natural erosion that is not chosen so much as undergone. Individual forgetting is something that happens to you. Community forgetting is something that a community does. It is practiced. It requires participants. It involves, at minimum, a shared decision not to speak certain things aloud, not to follow certain threads in public conversation, not to insist on the connection between causes and their effects when those connections are uncomfortable for the people who benefit from the cause continuing unaddressed. Springfield is the most elaborated portrait of community forgetting in the history of American popular culture. The show has been practicing community forgetting as both subject and method for 36 years. The subject is Springfield's relationship with its own contaminated history, its own impossible timeline, its own institutional corruption. The method is the episodic structure that erases consequences between installments, that allows the show to produce an image of a normal family in a normal town, while the details that build across seasons tell a completely different story. The dark theories of The Simpsons are, at their root, the enterprise of resisting the forgetting, of insisting on the thread that the show plants and then declines to follow, of saying, the three-eyed fish means something, the cracked cooling towers mean something, the man who cannot remember his employee's name after 20 years of employment means something, the baby who waited until the room was empty before she reenacted the shooting means something. Everything means something. The show put it there because it means something. Springfield forgets. The audience remembers. This is the contract between the dark theories and the show. The show produces evidence and then refuses to present it as evidence. The theories accept the evidence and build the case the show will not build itself. On Homer's hands, a close reading. Homer Simpson has 4 fingers on each hand. This is true of all Springfield residents, and the show's standard explanation, when explanation is offered at all, is that this is an animation convention. 4-fingered characters are easier and faster to draw than 5-fingered ones. The reduced finger count is an economic choice by the animators, a practical shortcut that became a visual signature. This explanation is true in production terms. In narrative terms, within the logic of the show's own universe, 4 fingers on every Springfield resident requires a different explanation. Human beings have 5 fingers on each hand. This is a consistent feature of human biology, encoded deeply enough in our developmental genetics that significant deviations from it are extremely rare and typically associated with specific genetic conditions or developmental disruptions. A town in which every resident has 4 fingers on each hand is a town in which every resident has the same developmental deviation from normal human anatomy. The deviation is not selective. It does not affect some residents and spare others. It is universal across the Springfield population, which means whatever is causing it is an environmental factor with complete penetrance, something so ubiquitous in Springfield's ecosystem that no resident escapes its influence on development. Radiation at specific doses during specific developmental windows can cause limb anomalies. This is established in medical literature going back to the atomic testing of the 1940s and 1950s, and confirmed more broadly in research on radiation exposure in various contexts. The specific anomaly varies. 4 fingers rather than 5 is one configuration of a class of outcomes that includes various structural differences in the extremities. The dark theory holds that the 4-fingered hand of every Springfield resident is not an animation convention within the show's own logic. It is the most universal physical marker of what the power plant has done to the town's population. The yellow skin could have another explanation. The bulging eyes could be individual variation. The various cognitive differences could be attributed to other factors. But 4 fingers, universally, across every single person who has grown up in Springfield, without exception, the power plant is the only entity in Springfield's history capable of producing an environmental effect that complete and that consistent. Burns owns the plant that gave Springfield its hands. He sees 4 fingers on every face he looks at, and he knows what put them there, and he has known since long before anyone else began to suspect. On the silence of Maggie extended theory, the dark theory of Maggie Simpson has been building across every season. But in the late seasons, it reaches a point of complexity that the early seasons could not have predicted. Maggie has been 1-year-old for 36 years. She has been watching for 36 years. The show has given her moments of extraordinary action, of demonstrated intelligence, of decisive intervention. The shielding of Burns, the defense of the butterfly, the daycare rebellion, the moments where her pacifier and her enormous eyes and her deliberate silence have combined into something that the show frames as surprising and then forgets and then reveals as surprising again. But the late seasons do something new with Maggie. They begin to let her be mysterious. Not comic mysterious, not the mystery of a background character who keeps dying and coming back. A different kind of mysterious. The mystery of a character who has been accumulating experience and capacity for longer than any other character in the show's history, who has done this accumulation in complete silence, and whose eventual action, when it comes, will be shaped by everything she has been absorbing since December 1989. Maggie has watched Homer fall asleep on the couch in every episode. She has watched Marge stand in the kitchen and look out the window with an expression the show uses to communicate everything Marge does not say. She has watched Lisa fight and lose and fight again. She has watched Bart get up from every consequence and go back to the beginning. She has watched the plant on the horizon. She has watched Burns in his car. She has watched the 3-eyed fish in the river and the luminous rats in the facility walls and the yellow faces of the town going about their days. She has not said a word. The dark theory asks, what do you become after 36 years of watching everything and saying nothing? What kind of understanding accumulates in silence that long? What is the shape of a mind that has been processing Springfield's full reality without the cognitive limitations that the environment has imposed on everyone around it for the entire run of the show? The late seasons do not answer this. The show does not answer this. Maggie remains 1-year-old and silent and watching, but the dark theory holds that the answer is coming. That whatever Maggie has been building toward across 36 years of deliberate silence and deliberate observation, the show has been building toward it too. That when Maggie finally speaks, finally acts in the way her accumulated understanding makes possible, it will not be a surprise to anyone who has been watching carefully. It will be the thing the show has been moving towards since the first episode. The most intelligent person in Springfield, grown patient and absolute in her silence, deciding finally that the moment has arrived. On Marge's blue hair, a reading against the grain, Marge Simpson's blue hair is one of the most recognizable visual elements in the history of television. It towers. It does not waver. It does not deflect under wind or rain or the various physical forces that the show periodically subjects the family to. It is, within Springfield's visual logic, as permanent and structural as the plant on the skyline. The standard reading of Marge's hair is aesthetic. It is her signature. It is the visual element that identifies her instantly, that makes her image iconographic in a way that does not require the full character to be present. The dark theory finds something different in the hair. Marge's hair is maintained, actively, continuously maintained. She visits the beauty salon. She uses specific products. The blue is not natural, it is dyed, and the tower is not natural, it is structured. Marge's hair is a construction, a daily, ongoing act of self-maintenance that she performs against whatever entropy the world is attempting to impose on her. This is Marge's pattern across the entire show, she maintains. She maintains the marriage while Homer stumbles. She maintains the household while the chaos of the family's various disasters creates pressure on every domestic system. She maintains her own emotional equilibrium against the accumulated weight of everything that living in the Simpson household and in Springfield requires of her. Marge's hair is the show's visual metaphor for what Marge does. She wills the tower into existence every morning. She says, "This is the form I have chosen, and I will maintain it in the face of everything that would reduce it to something less." The dark theory reads this not as weakness or compulsion, but as a specific kind of strength. The strength of a person who has decided what they are, and who maintains that decision actively, through repeated effort, against a world that is always working in the direction of entropy. Marge's blue tower is not vanity, it is declaration. But the dark theory also holds, what does it cost her? What does it cost a person to be the maintenance in a family where maintenance is always, perpetually, her responsibility? What accumulates in Marge across 36 years of being the one who holds things together while the things she is holding together keep finding new ways to need holding? The show's most honest episodes about Marge are the ones where the maintenance fails. Briefly, episodically. The moments where she snaps or drinks too much or does something impulsive that is utterly out of character with the woman she otherwise presents. These moments are always followed by resolution, by the restoration of equilibrium, by Marge returning to the blue tower and the steady maintenance. But the moments where it fails are the show's most honest glimpses of the cost. Marge is not the show's most tragic character. The show assigns that role to various others across its run, but she is the show's most load-bearing character. She is what everyone else is held up by. And the dark theory, which has spent considerable energy on what the plant has done to Homer, and what Burns did to Mona, and what Springfield has done to Lisa, and what the conditioning did to Ned, holds Marge carefully and asks, what has 36 years of maintenance done to Marge? What is growing underneath the blue tower, in the silence between Marge's patience and Marge's need? The show has not answered this fully. It has gestured. In the moments of failure, and in the episodes where Marge is given her own story, rather than a supporting role in someone else's, the dark theory holds the question open. Because the answer, when it comes, will be the most important thing the show has ever said about what it takes to love a family in a contaminated town for 36 years without stopping. On Burns's smile, the oldest predator. There is a way Mr. Burns smiles that the show's animators discovered somewhere in the early seasons and have been refining ever since. It is a smile that contains no warmth. This is not unusual for a villain character. What is unusual is the specific quality of warmth's absence. Burns does not smile with menace, exactly. He does not smile with triumph. He does not smile with cruelty, though cruelty is certainly in his behavioral repertoire. Burns smiles with the specific expression of a very old predator who is watching something that is not aware of being watched. The smile of a creature that has outlived all of its natural competitors and most of its natural prey and has arrived, over centuries, at a relationship with the world that is no longer organized around threat or effort but around the patient, absolute confidence of something that has been operating long enough that it does not need to hurry. This is the dark truth about Burns that the show communicates through its animation more effectively than through any episode's plot. Burns is not a villain in the conventional sense of a character who wants something specific and works toward it. Burns is an ecosystem. He is the oldest feature of Springfield's landscape, older than the plant itself, older than the institutions he has corrupted, older than the families he has shaped through his indirect influence. He is part of Springfield's geology. He does not hurry because he has never needed to hurry. Every human urgency that the other characters experience, the urgency of deadlines and mortality and consequences, and the feeling that time is running out, is genuinely foreign to Burns. Not because he is incapable of understanding urgency, but because urgency is for organisms that do not have weekly radiation treatments and private physicians and a century of accumulated institutional capture. Burns smiles because he already knows how the story ends. The plant will keep running. The violations will continue. The water will stay compromised. The next safety inspector will be as thoroughly managed as this one. Springfield will keep forgetting and keep voting for comfort and keep looking at the three-eyed fish and shrugging. And Burns will be here for all of it, watching from his office with that specific smile, the predator who has outlived everything that used to be a threat. The final season meditation, What We Owe Springfield. We have now traveled through every major dark thread the show has planted and developed across 36 seasons. The contamination that explains the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and Homer's 55 IQ, and the fish that has 3 eyes and Burns' radioactive glow in the dark. The coma that explains the aging freeze and the tonal shift after season 4, and the escalating surreality, and the celebrity flood and the show's permanent present tense. The Mona Simpson conspiracy that explains Homer's specific psychological damage and the deal that Abe made, and the job that was guaranteed, and the adult Homer who works every day for the man who stole his childhood. The shooting that was never fully solved, and the baby whose final shot of the episode was performed in a room she confirmed was empty before she performed it. The town that voted to forget its own truth and made it illegal to remember. The man who is too expensive to die and whose price Springfield pays in every glass of water it drinks. The sister who learned, from watching Lisa fight and lose, that silence is the most powerful thing a Simpson woman can carry. The neighbor whose kindness was programmed into him before he was old enough to choose it, and who has been performing goodness inside a cage for 36 years, while the universe rewards the man next door who does not even try. And underneath all of it, the floating timeline. The permanent present, the family frozen exactly as Homer last saw them, or as America last needed them, or as some combination of both, preserved in the specific amber of a weekly broadcast that began in December 1989 and has not, by any measure anyone can cite, ended. The dark theories are the show's shadow. They exist because the show is bright enough to cast one. And the shadow is the shape of everything the comedy is protecting you from having to look at directly. The damage and the conspiracy and the contamination and the loss. The shadow is also the shape of the love. Because you do not build a shadow this elaborate, you do not construct this much protective brightness, unless what you are protecting matters enormously. The Simpsons is protecting something. It has been protecting it for 36 years. The family on the couch, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the Sunday night that keeps returning with the same voices and the same opening theme and the same yellow faces. The thing the show is protecting is simple and unkillable. The knowledge, which the dark theories find everywhere underneath the comedy, that family is worth dreaming about. Even if the dream is the only form of it you have left. Even if the house on Evergreen Terrace exists only in the specific way that a coma-dreaming mind can make things exist, warm and complete and never fading. Even if the contamination is real and the conspiracy is real and the damage is real and the fish have 3 eyes and the cooling towers are cracked and Burns is in his office smiling the smile of something that has outlived everything that used to challenge it. Even then, the family is worth dreaming about. Homer knew this. He has always known this. It is, possibly, the only thing he has ever fully known. And across 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes, and every dark thread we have followed to its end, it is the one thing that has never cracked. Homer loves his family. Everything else is footnotes. End of all expansion content. Total script word count across all sections. Approximately 44,000 words. Additional deep content. the theories that cross seasons, Hans Moleman and the body count nobody counts. There is a character in The Simpsons whose name has been spelled at least 3 ways across the series, whose age has been stated as 31 despite his appearance suggesting a man in his late 80s or 90s, and who holds a record that the show has never acknowledged, celebrated, or explained. Hans Moleman is the most frequently killed recurring character in the history of American animated television. He has been hit by cars, run over by cars, crushed by falling objects, buried alive by other characters and by circumstance. He has fallen from heights. He has been set on fire. He has been eaten by animals large enough to eat a small elderly man who is not paying attention. He has been electrocuted, drowned in various liquids, struck by lightning, and subjected to the kind of physical forces that, applied to a normal human body, would produce outcomes that medical professionals would classify as final. And he keeps coming back, not with explanation, not with a resurrection scene or a continuity note or a brief acknowledgement that the character who died 3 episodes ago is back because it turned out he survived. He simply appears, alive, ready to be killed again. The show presents this as a running gag. The audience accepts it as such. Nobody investigates. Nobody asks. Springfield certainly does not ask, because Springfield has perfected the art of not asking about things that are happening right in front of it. But the dark theories have questions. The coma theory asks, is Hans Moleman a real character in the dream's Springfield, or is he the dream's background fill? The filler face that a dreaming mind generates to populate crowd scenes and then regenerates when the crowd scene in the next episode needs a small elderly man to anchor it? Under this reading, Moleman is not a person. He is a recurring visual signal in Homer's dream, the same small figure the dream deploys when it needs a certain kind of background presence. He dies because background processes terminate. He comes back because the dream spawns a new instance of the process without retaining the state of the previous one. The radiation theory asks, has Moleman's biology been so thoroughly altered by exposure to Springfield's contaminated environment that his cellular processes have developed a relationship with trauma that normal biology does not possess? Not immunity exactly, not invulnerability, but a specific, unprecedented resilience at the cellular level that allows his body to reconstitute itself after events that would permanently terminate normal biological function. The collective denial theory asks, is Moleman's repeated death and return simply another thing that Springfield has agreed, silently and collectively, not to follow to its logical conclusion? Another thread that the community has decided will not be pulled, because pulling it would require acknowledging something about the town's environment that the town cannot afford to acknowledge? The show does not choose between these readings. It does not need to. All 3 are available simultaneously, which is precisely how the most resonant details in long-running fictional universes tend to operate. They are generative rather than closed. They produce questions rather than answers. They invite the dark theories rather than resolving them. What the dark theories cannot overlook, what they all agree on regardless of their other divergences, is this. Hans Moleman said he was 31 years old. He does not look 31 years old. Whatever has happened to his body, the specific processes that aged it past its stated age, that bent it and compressed it and reduced it to the fragile, nearly blind, endlessly suffering figure that Springfield's background contains, those processes are also the processes that have left him unable to die permanently. He was aged beyond his years by Springfield's environment, and he was made indestructible by it. These 2 outcomes from the same cause, the aging and the endurance, the degradation and the persistence. This is the dark theory's most compressed image of what Springfield does to the people inside it. It ages them faster than they should age, and it makes it impossible for them to leave. You cannot leave Springfield by dying. You keep coming back. Hans Moleman has been trying to leave for 36 years. Springfield keeps returning him. The God problem: who gets answered and who does not. The Simpsons established, through multiple episodes and in canonical rather than dream sequence terms, that God is real and accessible within Springfield's universe. God has appeared on screen. God has spoken to characters. God has expressed preferences and opinions and made promises. God has answered prayers, at least some prayers, at least some of the time. This is significant for the dark theory in several ways, each of which deepens the others. The first significance is simply ontological. In a universe where God exists and communicates, the question of who receives communication and who does not is not a matter of uncertain metaphysics. It is a matter of observable record. God communicated with Homer. This is in the canonical record. God has not communicated with Ned Flanders in any comparable way. This is also in the canonical record. The gap between these two facts is one of the show's most provocative theological gestures. Homer's conversations with God do not occur because Homer is devout. Homer is, by any conventional religious standard, a spectacularly imperfect practitioner of faith. He sleeps in church. He prays primarily when he needs something specific. His theological sophistication is limited, and his practice of religion is inconsistent, inconvenient, and marked by the same mixture of good intentions and poor execution that characterizes everything Homer does. Ned's faith, by contrast, is comprehensive, consistent, sincere, and organized. Ned has built his entire life around his religious practice. He is the character for whom faith is not a Sunday obligation but an operating principle, a framework through which every decision passes and every difficulty is processed. And yet it is Homer who gets the divine audiences. The dark theory has several interpretations of this gap. The first and most theologically orthodox within the show's own logic is that God is interested in people who are genuinely themselves rather than people who perform themselves. Homer is always, without pretense or management, exactly what he is. His relationship with God, when it occurs, is as uncensored and unperformed as everything else about Homer. He speaks to God the way he speaks to everyone, without filtering, without strategy, without the careful management of presentation that Ned's conditioned self-presentation requires. Ned cannot speak to God without the conditioning intervening. Every word Ned directs upward has been processed through the behavioral reprogramming that shaped him as a child and continues to shape him as an adult. The conditioning was designed to make Ned acceptable to the community, acceptable to the social expectations of a good Christian man in a suburban neighborhood. But it was also, inadvertently, designed to make Ned opaque to himself, to create a gap between what Ned feels and what Ned is permitted to express. God, if we take the show's theology seriously, might find this gap difficult to work with. Homer has no such gap. Homer's feelings and Homer's expressions are the same thing delivered at nearly the same instant. There is no processing, no filtering, no management. Homer is transparently, completely himself at all times, which has obvious disadvantages in most social and professional contexts, but which might constitute, in the specific context of divine communication, a kind of accessibility that the more carefully managed Ned cannot match. This is the warm version of the interpretation. The dark version is different. The dark version holds that the God of Springfield's universe is not a God of justice or of virtue or of careful ethical practice. The God of Springfield's universe, whose communications with Homer have included casual revelations, specific prophecies, and the particular warmth of a deity who genuinely seems to enjoy the specific company of this specific stumbling man, is a God organized around something harder to name, around love maybe. The specific, impractical, absolute love that Homer carries for his family and that the show has been documenting for 36 years. A love that is not well managed or strategic or expressed in the ways that formal moral frameworks usually count as virtue. A love that is present and complete and fundamentally unreasonable in exactly the way that the theological traditions most serious about divine love tend to describe divine love. Homer loves his family the way, in certain traditions, God is described as loving creation, without condition, without calculation, without the capacity to stop even when stopping would be rational. Ned's love for his family and his community and his God is real, but it has been processed. It has been managed. It has been routed through the conditioning and the behavioral reprogramming and the careful framework of acceptable expression until it arrives in the world in forms that are recognizable and approvable and do not threaten anyone's comfort. Homer's love arrives raw, and the dark theory's God, apparently, finds the raw version worth visiting. The Treehouse of Horror. What happens when the rules break? Every Halloween, The Simpsons produces an episode outside its regular continuity. The Treehouse of Horror segments operate under a different set of constraints than the regular episodes. Characters can die. The logic of the Springfield universe can be violated without creating continuity problems. The show can go to places that the regular episodes, operating within the accumulated weight of their own history, cannot. This freedom is the Dark Theory's most generative annual gift. Because the Treehouse of Horror episodes do not need to be resolved, do not need to return characters to their baseline, do not need to pretend that Springfield's reality holds, they show you what the show's creators believe is underneath that reality. What happens when you remove the pressure to maintain the fiction? And what happens is surprisingly consistent. Homer dies. Often. In the Treehouse episodes, Homer dies with a regularity that the regular episodes can only gesture toward. He is killed by aliens, by monsters, by supernatural forces, by his own decisions, by Bart's pranks taken to their logical terminal conclusions. He dies and the episodes continue, sometimes with a zombie Homer, sometimes with Homer's ghost, sometimes with the plot simply moving past the death as though it were a detail rather than a consequence. The Dark Theory reads these deaths not as pure transgressive comedy, but as the show's annual honest reckoning with what Homer's regular episode existence requires it to suppress. Homer survives impossible things in the regular episodes because he has to. The regular episodes need him there for the next one. The coma dream needs its dreamer to keep dreaming. The family needs its center. The Treehouse episodes are the annual release valve. The once-a-year permission for the show to let happen what the accumulated logic of Homer's existence suggests should happen more often. The collision of Homer Simpson with his actual situation allowed to produce the outcome that reality, in any realistic sense, would regularly produce. He dies in October. He comes back in November. And the show's regular logic reasserts itself, and Homer is fine, and the plant is still running, and the family is on the couch. But the Treehouse episodes leave a residue. A sense, annual and slightly unsettling, that the gap between what happens to Homer in the special episodes and what can happen to him in the regular ones is not a gap between fiction and superfiction. It is the gap between what the dream will allow and what the dream cannot prevent from occasionally surfacing. Even in the coma dream, October comes. And October, briefly, is honest. What the secondary characters know. One of the most underexplored territories in Simpsons' Dark Theory is the knowledge and awareness of Springfield's secondary and tertiary characters. Not Homer, not Marge, not the Simpson children. The people who populate the background of Springfield's life, who have their own histories, their own relationships with the town, their own accumulation of experiences that the show visits briefly and then moves past. Apu Nahasapi Mapetilon, who has worked at the Quick E-Mart for decades, and who sees, through the store's window and across its counter, the full cross-section of Springfield's daily life. Who sells Homer the donuts and the Duff beer, and the various packaged comfort foods that constitute Homer's relationship with the consumption end of the contamination pipeline? Who has watched the town's population maintain its specific configuration of mild confusion and cheerful impairment for as long as he has been here? What does Apu know? The Dark Theory holds that characters like Apu, who came to Springfield from outside, who were not born into the town's water and air and radiation, who have a comparison point between what Springfield is and what other places are like, carry a kind of knowledge that the town's native population cannot access. They know what people outside Springfield are like. They have a reference point for normal. And the Dark Theory asks, what does it do to you to have that reference point, to spend decades watching the gap between normal and Springfield, and to say nothing? Because Apu does not say anything. He serves the donuts and the beer, and he watches, and he runs his business, and he participates in the town's life, and he does not, in any episode the show has produced, present his comparative knowledge as evidence or accusation. He became part of Springfield. He became, gradually, another participant in the collective decision not to follow certain threads. The Dark Theory does not condemn him for this. It simply notes it. The people who come to Springfield from outside, who have the comparison point, who could in principle see clearly what the town's native population cannot, eventually stop seeing clearly too. Not necessarily through contamination, through participation. Through the social gravity of a community organized around its own denial, which pulls everyone who spends enough time in it toward the same center, you become Springfield. The Dark Theory holds this as the show's most serious claim about the nature of place. That where you are changes who you are. That long enough in a specific environment reshapes your perception of it until you can no longer clearly see the thing you are inside. Every character in Springfield who came from somewhere else and is still in Springfield is evidence of this. They arrived with comparison points. Springfield wore the comparison points down, and now they live there, and they serve the donuts, and the town's quiet, impossible continuity closes around them the way it closes around everyone who stays long enough. The show that will not end, and what that means. The Simpsons will not end. Not now. In 2025 or 2026 or whenever you are watching and reading this, not at any foreseeable point in the future. The institutional momentum behind the show, the cultural weight of it, the contractual structures that keep it in production, the audience that returns to it with the specific loyalty of people returning to a place they grew up in, none of these things are trending toward conclusion. The show will continue. And the dark theories will continue to be generated by the show's continuation. Because every episode that airs adds to the record. Every new couch gag and every new guest appearance and every new improbable Homer adventure and every scene where Maggie watches from her carrier and every episode where Ned looks across the fence at Homer's house with that specific expression that is somewhere between envy and pity and genuine baffling love. All of it adds to the accumulation of evidence from which the dark theories build. The show produces the material for its own investigation. This has been true since season 1. It became more true with each season that added to the archive. And in the late seasons, when the show began to be explicitly aware of itself as an archive, as a record of American cultural history compressed into cartoon form, the production of dark theory material became in some ways the primary thing the show does. Not comedy, exactly, not drama. Something that contains both but is organized around neither. An ongoing, inexhaustible portrait of a specific place and a specific family at a specific moment in American cultural history that keeps being the same moment because the moment will not be allowed to pass. The dark theories are what you find when you look at that portrait from the angle the portrait was not designed to be seen from. When you look at the scaffold rather than the canvas, when you look at the things the painting was painted over rather than the painting itself, and what you find there is not a conspiracy in the thriller sense. It is something more specific, more human, and more honest. A family damaged and surrounded by damage, and loved with a completeness that the damage cannot reduce. Living in a town that is impossible and contaminated and beloved, and that has not changed in 36 years and will not change in the next 36. The dark theories do not destroy the warmth. They are the warmth's shadow. And a warm thing always casts a shadow. The plant is still running. The family is still on the couch. Springfield is still out there, on every map and no map, in every living room and no living room, waiting for Sunday night with the patient certainty of a place that has decided it is permanent. And we will be back. We always come back to Springfield. Because Springfield, for all its darkness and all its damage and all its beautiful, terrible, impossible persistence, is the one place in American culture that has never asked us to grow up. It has only ever asked us to come home. And we know the way. We have always known the way. Script complete. Approximate total, 43,500 plus words. One last theory. The one the show was always building toward. Every theory in this script has been working towards something. Not an answer, an understanding. The understanding is this. The Simpsons is the longest sustained examination of ordinary American life that popular culture has ever produced. Not the most sophisticated. Not the most artistically ambitious, the most sustained. 36 years of returning to the same family, the same town, the same set of problems and pleasures and failures and small recoveries, with a consistency that nothing else in the history of the medium can match. This matters because duration changes what a portrait can show you. A painting captures a moment. A photograph captures a moment. A film captures 2 hours. A series with a defined arc captures a season or a few. But a show that runs for 36 years captures something that none of those other forms can capture. It captures the specific quality of a life that does not go anywhere. Not a tragic life. Not a triumphant life. The specific quality of an ordinary life that continues. That gets up in the morning and goes to work and comes home and falls asleep on the couch and does it again. That loves its family not through grand gestures but through the accumulated small evidence of presence. That survives the catastrophes not through heroism but through the simple biological stubbornness of being still there when the catastrophe passes. The dark theories illuminate this life from below. They show you the infrastructure of its ordinariness, the contamination and the conspiracy and the damage and the systematic diminishment that are the context for every donut and every strangling and every Sunday night couch scene. And what you see when you look at the ordinary life from below and from above at the same time, when you hold the dark theories in one hand and the warm comedy in the other, is something the show has never stated directly and may not know it is saying. The ordinary life, lived with love, in a contaminated town, under the shadow of a cracked cooling tower, without the cognitive tools to fully understand the architecture of its own damage, is still a life. Is still real. Is still, in its specific weight and its specific warmth and its specific indestructible tendency to return to the couch at the end of the day and reach for the remote and settle in for another evening with the family, worth the name. Homer Simpson is not a hero. He is not a victim. He is a man who goes to work every day in a building that is poisoning his town, who comes home every night to a family he loves more completely than he can express, who sleeps on the couch because the couch is where the day finally releases him, and who wakes up the next morning and does it again. He does it again because that is what love requires. Not the grand version of love, the daily version, the version that shows up, the version that is present and imperfect and stubbornly, continuously there. The dark theories have spent tens of thousands of words building the case that something is deeply wrong in Springfield. That the contamination is real and the conspiracy is real, and the damage is real and the loop is running, and the town will not change. All of this is true within the logic the show provides, and it is worth knowing. And Homer is still on the couch. Marge is still in the kitchen. Bart is still on his skateboard somewhere in the Springfield afternoon. Lisa is still playing her saxophone in her room, the notes drifting out through the window into a sky that is probably not entirely clean, and a town that probably cannot hear what she is playing, and an evening that will pass and be replaced by another evening exactly like it. And Maggie is in her carrier, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for whatever it is she has been waiting for across 36 years of the most patient and the most complete and the most deliberately invisible intelligence that Springfield has ever produced. She is 1 year old. She is the show's last secret. She is the reason, even after every dark theory has been laid out and examined and followed to its end, that the story is not over. Because Maggie has not decided to act yet, and when she does, it will not be what we expected. It will be the thing the loop was building toward all along. Underneath every couch gag and every donut and every Marge quietly worrying at the window and every Burns smiling in his office and every Ned praying into silence and every Homer stumbling through a day that is too much for him and not enough and exactly right, it will be Maggie, 1 year old and 36 years patient simultaneously, in the way that everything in Springfield is both impossible and completely real, deciding that the moment has arrived, and the pacifier dropping, and Springfield, for the first time in its history, hearing what it has been missing. The show began in December 1989 with a family finding its way home on Christmas Eve. It will end, whenever it ends, with the same family in the same house on the same street. The shape of the story was always the same shape, not a line going somewhere, a circle closing on itself, a loop that is also a home. We have been inside that loop for 36 years. We put ourselves there, we chose the couch, we chose Springfield, we chose the family that never changes in the town that never ages, in the story that never ends. And we were right to choose them. All the darkness and all the damage and all the theories do not change this. We were right. End of script. The Springfield equation, how every theory connects. The theories we have explored across 36 seasons are not independent of each other. They are connected by a logic that becomes visible when you lay them alongside each other and look at what they share. Every theory begins with the same observation. Something in Springfield does not work the way it should. The fish have 3 eyes. The residents have 4 fingers. The principal is not who he says he is. The billionaire glows in the dark. The safety inspector cannot pass an intelligence test. The baby has not aged in 36 years. Each theory then provides a different explanation for why this is true. The radiation theory says environmental contamination. The coma theory says dream logic. The collective denial theory says community choice. The Burns immortality theory says technology and wealth. The prediction theory says coincidence and cultural influence. But underneath these different explanations is a shared assumption, a premise that all the theories hold in common without always stating it explicitly. Springfield is a closed system. It is a closed system in the physical sense that the dark theory builds from the contamination evidence. A place where the same material cycles through the same water and the same air and the same bodies and the same food chain and the same reproductive cycle, accumulating with each pass through the loop rather than dissipating into a larger system that could dilute and process and eventually neutralize it. It is a closed system in the social sense that the principle and the pauper theory demonstrates. A community whose response to disruption is to close ranks and return to the established narrative. A community that has built its own stability on the continued suppression of its most destabilizing truths, and that has made this suppression into a structural feature of how it operates. It is a closed system in the narrative sense that the floating timeline establishes. A story that returns to the same moment every episode. That does not accumulate consequence in the way that open systems do. That processes each episode's events and then releases them, sending the characters back to their baseline, maintaining the exact configuration that the show began with in December 1989. The Springfield equation, which the dark theory assembles from all of these component theories, is simple. A closed system, operating for long enough without external disruption, becomes perfectly balanced in its dysfunction. Every element that might change the system reaches equilibrium with every other element that maintains it. The contamination is balanced by the cognitive damage that prevents its recognition. The cognitive damage is balanced by the emotional warmth that makes the contaminated town feel like home. The collective denial is balanced by the occasional eruption of truth that allows the denial to feel like a choice rather than a compulsion. Burns's power is balanced by Homer's love, which is the one force in Springfield's ecosystem that Burns has never successfully metabolized. The system is stable. It has been stable for 36 years. And what keeps it stable, what keeps the loop running and the timeline floating and the family on the couch, is something the dark theories have been circling without landing on directly. It is us. We are the external factor that Springfield's closed system requires to keep running. Without an audience, the show does not produce. Without the production, the episodes do not air. Without the episodes, the loop does not complete. Without the loop, the family does not return to the couch. The Springfield equation has a viewer variable. We are that variable. And the equation only balances. The loop only completes. The family only comes home if we keep watching. Which we do. Which we always do. Which is why the show will not end. Because we will not let it. Because Springfield is ours. And we are Springfield's. And the loop runs because love insists on running. Even now. Even here. Even in the dark.